Hello, welcome to this course called Planning, Putting It All Together. If you've already completed our previous courses, then you have a great foundation for what it takes to initiate a project and kick off the planning phase. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Rowena, and I'll be your instructor for this course. I work as a senior program manager in Google Cloud on a variety of projects. I mostly focus on systems and productivity enhancements for my team, which consists of around 100 full-time employees and more than 300 contractors around the world. Some of the largest scale projects that I work on impact Google Cloud sales and global sales support teams, which are made up of thousands of people. But I didn't start out building solutions for thousands of people at a global company. I left school at the age of 17 with no college degree and no real plan. Before Google, I worked in retail, hospitality, and even in the airline industry as a crew member. When I joined the corporate world, I noticed something. The processes were just as messy as the stockrooms of the retail stores where I'd worked. There was so much room to improve. I came to realize that every business is complicated and that there's always room to create order. So I started thinking about ways to automate my day-to-day tasks. I was emailing ideas to my manager and colleagues, working with teams across the company, brainstorming solutions to problems, coordinating training for my coworkers, and so much more. That's when it became clear I was project managing. I transferred into a role focused entirely on program management at Google's headquarters in Mountain View, California. In my job interview, I focused on examples of how I applied these transferable skills from my previous roles and how I could leverage the knowledge I gained from my experience. 4 years later, I'm here and I'm so excited to be partnering with you on this learning journey. From the outside, big global companies can seem as though they have it all figured out, but there's always room for new processes, and you likely have the skills and insights from your previous experiences that can be useful. So keep going, you're heading in the right direction. This course is focused on the planning phase. I'll share the tools and techniques to complete this phase. First up, I'll demonstrate how to kick off the planning phase. Then we'll explore the importance of setting and reaching milestones. For every milestone, there'll be a set of tasks to complete. So I'll teach you some tips for breaking down and distributing the workload. Later, we'll discuss the budget and how the overall budgeting process works. We'll learn about people or companies outside of your organization that may play a role in determining the budget. And we'll discuss the importance of sufficiently documenting your budget. Then, we'll discuss the various risks and the possible impact those risks can have on the project. Nothing ever goes quite as planned, but risk management is a great way to make sure you know what could go wrong and how you'll address it. This includes communicating possible risks to your stakeholders, creating a mitigation plan, and then keeping an eye on those risks to make sure they don't stall your projects. Last but not least, documentation ties it all together. Keeping all your project plans documented and organized not only helps you, but it also helps those involved knowing their responsibilities. Documentation also provides stakeholders with a window into the development of the project. It has always been important to the success of my own projects at Google, and I'm excited to explore this topic with you. Ready to get started? Meet you in the next video. Hi again. In the previous course, you learned about the initiation phase. During the initiation phase, the project manager is gathering all of the necessary preliminary information needed to get stakeholder approval and plan the project. A few key things need to happen during this time. First, the project manager gets assigned. That's you. Then, the goals of the project have to be approved, as well as the scope of the project and its deliverables. A number of people will need to be assigned to the project, and you'll have a good sense of their individual roles and responsibilities. You'll also need stakeholder sign-off on your project charter. If all of these criteria have been met, then you're set to begin planning. Planning is a significant part of ensuring a project's success. So let's take some time to discuss why it's so important. Planning is important for any project, large or small. While planning your project, You and other members of the team will determine the processes and workflows needed to meet your goals and put together ideas about how to make the project a success. While planning, you might draw from previous project experience, but don't be afraid to think of new ways to get results. Every project is different, so new and different approaches may be just the thing you need. Planning has many benefits. As we've discussed, planning helps you map out the full project. It helps you understand the work needed to achieve your goals. Planning also helps coordinate efforts and timelines with other teams, contractors, and vendors. Another huge benefit of planning is that it gives you time to identify and prepare for risks that could impact your project. Those might include things like a delay in the timeline, the departure of a critical team member, or a change in project direction from a primary stakeholder. Planning also gives you the chance to brainstorm ways to mitigate or address those risks. There are less obvious benefits too. For example, the planning phase can help you get buy-in from key members of the project team. Getting buy-in means that you've gained their support for your plans. Planning also demonstrates to stakeholders that the team is taking care to start the project with a detailed plan. But one of the most significant benefits of planning is teamwork, which will help you push your project across the finish line. By working together in the planning phase, individuals assigned to the project can become a strong team by the time the planning is done and the work is about to start. Planning together creates a shared understanding among all parties involved in the project. So, to recap, planning has many benefits, from helping the team to understand the work needed to achieve their goals to providing project plans to the stakeholders. Now that you know a bit more about planning, we'll learn how to launch the planning phase. Meet you in the next video. Hello again. In the last video, we discussed the importance of planning. Now, let's get into the details of how to launch the planning phase. As you learned earlier, the planning phase is the second phase of a project's life cycle. This can be a challenging time for a project manager because there's so much to consider. But it's important to know that project plans don't have to be perfect the very first time. And even if you do a great job with your plans the first time around, it's likely that the plan will change as the project evolves. The planning phase may differ from project to project, but generally 3 big things are worked out during this stage: the schedule, the budget, and the risk management plan. We'll discuss each of these in greater detail later on in the course. But for now, here's some general information so you can understand why these 3 elements are so crucial to planning. Let's start with the schedule. The schedule is basically a timeline of the project. It includes the start date, the end date, and the dates for things that will happen in between. You'll use time estimation techniques to determine these dates. Let's imagine scheduling in our example project at Office Green. As a reminder, you're the lead project manager for Project Plant Pals, a new service that will provide top clients with desk-friendly plants. You want to launch the service by the end of the year, so the planning phase for this effort should include a number of key dates. Those dates might include when you'll request proposals from plant vendors. They might also include the date you'll kick off with the web designers and developers who are creating a new website for the service. It should also include important dates during the project execution phase, like when the plants need to be ready for delivery, or when the new web page design needs to be approved. And you'll need to include the target date for the launch of the service. Another part of the planning phase is setting the budget. The budget will account for the total cost to complete the project. The total cost needs to be broken down to determine how much has to be spent on different elements of the project. For Project Plant Pals, the budget will need to include items like the cost of designing and launching a web page, the cost of hiring your plant vendor, and much more. The third component of the planning phase is risk management, which means searching for possible problems and planning ahead to mitigate these risks. Let's face it, risk is inevitable in every project. What's not inevitable is how the risk impacts your project. Good project planning means searching for places where trouble might occur. Where might the schedule get off track? Where might the budgets exceed your estimates? You'll work with your team to consider answers to these questions and prepare a risk management plan based on whatever you discover. Let's go back to the Office Green example. While putting together the initial schedule, you may realize that your estimates from your developers put you way beyond your launch date. To manage that risk, you might try to reduce or adjust the project scope to still meet your deadline, or even negotiate a new launch date with your stakeholders. These are two simple examples of how you might mitigate a scheduling risk. So, to recap, you'll spend the planning phase building your schedule, setting your budget, and preparing your risk management plan. But first, you need to get the whole team on board. Next, we'll discuss the project kickoff meeting, which is where the project really gets going. Meet you there. Hello again. In this video, you'll learn how to schedule a kickoff meeting once you're ready to shift into planning mode. It's important to schedule a meeting that will serve as a formal start to project planning. You might be wondering what a kickoff meeting is and how it differs from other types of meetings. That's a great question. A project kickoff meeting is the first meeting in which a project team comes together to ground everyone in a shared vision, gain a shared understanding of the project's goals and scope, and to understand each person's individual roles within the team. So, who's invited to the kickoff meeting? Well, that would be the team members identified in a RACI chart created during the initiation phase. As a reminder, a RACI chart helps to define roles and responsibilities for individuals or teams to ensure that the work gets done efficiently. During the kickoff meeting, team members will learn more about how they'll contribute to the project and how they'll gain a deeper understanding of how the team will work together to reach the project's goals. You should also invite your stakeholders and your sponsor to the meeting so that they have a chance to understand the high-level plan for the project, can share their perspective, and you can ensure that everyone is on the same page. Now, you might be wondering, why do I need a kickoff meeting? Can't my team learn everything they need to know from the project charter? We get it. Meetings can be time-consuming, and there are definitely situations when a quick email or a chat to a teammate will suffice. But when you're kicking off a project, especially larger projects with multiple people involved, it's important to get together to establish a shared vision, align on the scope, and build team rapport. This is also an opportunity for teammates to ask questions and offer insights. And it's a great time for you to set expectations with the team about how each person will individually contribute to the project. Now, let's discuss how to plan and run a kickoff meeting. There are lots of templates for kickoff meeting agendas online, but most follow a similar structure and last about an hour. Keep in mind that this is just a suggestion, and you should feel free to schedule as much or as little time for each agenda item according to the needs of your project and the team. Most meetings start with brief introductions. You can allocate about 10 minutes for everyone in the group to introduce themselves and their roles, and if time allows, share a fun fact to help build team rapport. Then you'll spend about 5 minutes giving an overview of the background of the project. This covers details like how the project came to be and why the project matters. You'll also use this time to set a shared vision. Next, spend about 5 minutes sharing the goals and the scope, which refers to the boundaries around a project. That includes making it clear what work is considered in scope and what work is considered out of scope. This is also a good place to share the target launch date and highlight any important milestones the team need to be aware of. Once you've covered goals and scope, it's time to discuss everyone's roles. It's a good idea to spend about 5 minutes making sure that everyone is clear on what work they'll be responsible for throughout the duration of the project. Next, it's time to address collaboration, which is how the team will work together on the project. This is a great time to go over tools that will serve as a communal source of information for the team, like a project plan created in a spreadsheet or a work management software tool like Asana. It's also a great time to determine how the team will communicate with one another, like through daily email updates, a team chat room, and weekly team check-in meetings. You should spend about 10 minutes on this topic. When that's all set, it's time to discuss what comes next. Now that you've discussed the details of the project thus far, you should spend about 10 minutes setting expectations with your teammates for what's coming up. You'll also use this time to make clear to each teammate what actions they'll need to take next. Finally, it's really important to set aside about 15 minutes for questions from the group. This is your team's chance to gain clarity on any of the topics you've discussed so far. It's also your chance to hear from the team and ensure that the project is benefiting from diversity of thoughts, experiences, and ideas. For example, in addition to fielding questions out loud in the meeting, I might invite teammates to input their questions or feedback in a shared document. This practice can help create space for collaboration. I also like to poll my teammates for confidence on the topics discussed that day. I ask what their confidence level is on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being, I'm not confident at all, and 5 being, I'm extremely confident. If they're not confident, I ask them what I can do to help change that. This practice can give the team a stronger sense of support because they know I'm there to help them through roadblocks. If you try this practice in your meetings, be sure to deliver on any promises you make there. Your reputation as a project manager to get things done and remove roadblocks is critical to building and maintaining relationships. So, to recap, the kickoff meeting will cover introductions, project background, goals and scope, roles, collaboration, and what comes next. And the meeting will leave time for questions from the group at the end. Once you've finalized the meeting agenda, document this information into a meeting agenda template and send it to attendees a day or two ahead of the meeting. As the project manager, you'll be leading the majority of this meeting. And when you're presenting, it's difficult to take notes and present at the same time. So, at the start of the meeting, ask a teammate to take notes on key points you discussed throughout the session and to record each teammate's action items. In some cases, it may be beneficial to record this meeting so that attendees can revisit it later, especially if you have a large or dispersed team. Just be sure to get each attendee's permission to record ahead of time. After the meeting, don't forget to send a follow-up email to the group summarizing key points and outcomes from the meeting, as well as any action items to the attendees. In your follow-up email, be sure to also invite attendees to reach out if they have any additional questions. While there's a lot that goes into the kickoff meeting, remember that this is an exciting moment for the team, and especially for you as the project manager. All of the careful thinking and hard work that you've done during the initiation phase comes together to form the foundation of your project. Coming up, we'll learn about milestones, tasks, and how they differ. Meet you in the next video. Hi again. As we've discussed throughout this program, the project manager is responsible for assigning work to the team and keeping track of the project's progress. When we discuss assigning work, we'll use a few key terms: project milestones and project tasks. Let's break these down. A project milestone is an important point within the project schedule that indicates progress and usually signifies the completion of a deliverable or phase of the project. These are significant checkpoints in your project, and keeping track of them helps ensure that your project is on schedule to meet its goals. For example, a milestone might include completing the first draft of a report, and the goal may be to ultimately publish the report. Another example of a milestone is receiving sign-off or approval from your customer on a major deliverable. Let's discuss how milestones differ from project tasks. A project task is an activity that needs to be accomplished within a set period of time. The work of a project is broken down into many different tasks. In order to reach a milestone, you and your team must complete multiple tasks. For example, if a milestone is completing the first draft of a report, the tasks required to get to that milestone might include hiring a writer, conducting research, and drafting different sections of the report. Let's imagine milestones and tasks in the context of Project Plant Pals at Office Green. One of your project deliverables is to launch a website for your new service, where customers will be able to place orders and get customer support. Some of the milestones leading up to that launch will include securing approval on the website design and implementing feedback from user testing. To achieve those milestones, your team needs to complete multiple project tasks. For example, in order to reach the design milestone, Your website designer will need to create initial mock-ups of the proposed website design. You'll need to review those mock-ups, and the designer will need to implement your feedback. Each of these items is a project task, and you won't reach your milestone until they're complete. To review, milestones are important points within the project schedule, and project tasks are activities that need to be accomplished within a set period of time to help reach those milestones. Milestones and project tasks are interconnected. Tasks ladder up to milestones, which are crucial for project tracking. Now that you know more about milestones, project tasks, and how the two differ, we'll learn more about the importance of milestones in the next video. I'll meet you there. Great to see you again. So you've learned that a milestone is an important point within the project schedule that highlights progress and usually marks the completion of a deliverable or phase in the project. But now, let's talk about why setting milestones within your project is so important. While it might seem tempting to make a quick to-do list and get on with the project, it's really important that you take the time and effort to break your project down piece by piece. Here's why. First, setting milestones gives you a clear understanding of the amount of work your project will require. The act of setting milestones forces you to break your project down into more manageable chunks. The further you go, the better you'll be able to see how much work will be needed to meet the project goals. At first glance, it might seem simple to launch a new website, but it might be more work than you think. And if you break that deliverable down into milestones, and those milestones into tasks, you will have a better sense of the true amount of work that needs to be done. This will help you better manage the project workload. Another reason milestones are so great is that they can help keep your project on track. When you set a milestone, you assign clear deadlines for when certain project deliverables need to be completed. Then, as you work through the execution phase, you can look back at these deadlines to make sure that the project is progressing at the right pace. A third reason you'll want to set milestones is that they help you uncover areas where you might need to adjust scope, timelines, or resources to meet your goals. For example, if you realize that reaching a milestone will require more tasks than you'd anticipated, you might ask a stakeholder for permission to reduce the scope of the project and cut down on the number of tasks. And finally, there's one more reason milestones are so important. Actually reaching milestones can seriously motivate your team and illustrate real progress to your stakeholders. With big projects that go on for months, you'll want to keep the team's motivation high. A milestone signifies the completion of an important chunk of work and provides a moment of celebration for the team, even if there's more work ahead. Milestones also serve as a great check-in point to highlight your progress to stakeholders. It gives them the opportunity to see the work that's been completed so far and lets them see everything is on track and up to their standards. It's also important to remember that milestones must be completed on time and in sequential order, because usually reaching the next milestone is dependent on completing a previous milestone. Think about this in terms of Project Plant Powers at Office Green. As we discussed earlier, in order to launch a website for a new plant service, there are a few milestones you need to hit, like securing approval of a website design, completing development of the website, and implementing user feedback. These milestones must happen in this order. Here's why. The web developer can't build the website if the design hasn't been approved by stakeholders, and you can't implement feedback from user testing if there's no website to test. So we know it's important to reach milestones in sequential order, but it's just as important that you reach them on time. If the team misses the mark to complete a deliverable tied to a specific milestone, it could set back your project schedule, meaning your team might need to work overtime or add additional resources to catch up. For example, if you need to secure stakeholder approval on a website design by Friday, but the web designer hasn't completed the design yet, you might have to wait until after the weekend to secure stakeholder approval. This will delay the start of the development phase, giving your team less time to build the website. Even worse, this delay could affect the project budget if completing this deliverable directly ties to a payment from the client. If you miss the deadline you'll likely delay receipt of that payment. You might even risk losing the payment altogether. Though deadlines are sometimes flexible, it's important to be extra mindful of milestones where the deadline is non-negotiable. And that's that. Hopefully you understand why milestones are important to any project. Coming up, we'll discuss how to set milestones for your project. See you there. Hi again. Okay, so you know that milestones are pretty important. They help give you a clear picture of the amount of work required. They help your project stay on track, uncover areas where you might need additional resources, motivate your teammates, and show progress to your stakeholders. So now, let's talk about identifying milestones within your project and how you can set deadlines for each one. The first step to setting a milestone is to evaluate your project as a whole. It helps to refer back to your project charter to remind yourself of the project goal. Then, make a list of what your team needs to do to achieve that goal. The big items that indicate progress are your milestones. These are the key points within the project schedule that signify the completion of a project deliverable or a phase in the project. Smaller items, like any item that a stakeholder wouldn't need to review, for example, are tasks. You'll plan for these once you've separated them out from the milestones. So let's go back to our Office Green example. One of the project deliverables is a new website. And as we determined earlier, some milestones for our Office Green website scenario include securing approval of website design, completing development of the website, and implementing user feedback. Mocking up initial designs or building a landing page are smaller items on your list, so those are marked as tasks. Try to keep in mind that some projects might have many milestones, while others might just have 2 or 3. There's no one right number of milestones to set. The number will vary from project to project. Once you've determined your milestones, the next step is to assign each one a deadline. Reaching each of your milestones is dependent on the completion of multiple project tasks. So to make sure you give your team a fair amount of time to complete each of those tasks, you'll need to space your milestones out accordingly. For a larger, months-long project, like Project Plant Pals, you shouldn't expect to meet multiple milestones in the span of a week. Mocking up website designs and collecting insights from user testing are big tasks that take time. You need to space milestones out to give your team room to complete their work. To get a good sense of timing, you can connect with teammates to discuss the tasks required to reach each milestone and get their estimates for how long these tasks will take. With those estimates in mind, you can make an informed decision about reasonable deadlines for each milestone. When you set deadlines for milestones, you'll also want to consider the needs of your stakeholders. Ask yourself when they'll expect to see a certain project deliverable, and consider the answer when choosing a deadline. Your stakeholders will want to see regular indications that the team is making progress, and milestones are a great way to show that progress. So to recap, you set milestones by looking at your project as a whole and pulling out important checkpoints that show progress. Then you assign deadlines to each milestone while keeping the needs of your stakeholders top of mind. Next up, we'll discuss a helpful tool for breaking down the tasks that ladder up to each milestone. See you there. So we've discussed how to set milestones. Now we'll learn how to account for the many tasks that ladder up to each milestone. You can do this by creating a work breakdown structure. Let's start with a definition. A work breakdown structure, often abbreviated to WBS, is a tool that sorts the milestones and tasks of a project in a hierarchy in the order they need to be completed. This is a helpful tool because it helps break down the sometimes intimidating challenges of a project into more manageable chunks. Big projects like publishing a report or organizing a conference seem a lot less daunting when the work required to get there is broken down step by step, with a clear pathway from the beginning of the project to the end. Let's look at an example of a basic work breakdown structure. There are lots of different ways to design a work breakdown structure, but one common way is to create a tree diagram of project tasks. Let's say that we're creating a work breakdown structure for the Project Plant Pals website launch. At the top of the diagram is the name of the project. The second level of our diagram breaks the project down into 3 milestones. These include securing design approval, developing the site, and implementing user feedback. At the third level of the chart, we can see each of those milestones gets further broken down into a series of project tasks. For example, tasks listed beneath your design approval milestone include mocking up designs and collecting feedback. This is a very simple example of a work breakdown structure. Here, we've only created a work breakdown structure for a new website, which is just one of the Project Plant Pals deliverables. Keep in mind that in future project management roles, you'll likely create a WBS that outlines the tasks for an entire project. It's also important to note that while creating a work breakdown structure is a helpful exercise for visualizing the tasks of a project, you wouldn't typically include this type of diagram in your official project plan. Instead, you'd input the tasks identified through this exercise into a spreadsheet or your chosen work management software, where you can more easily assign owners to each task. Okay, so after completing a work breakdown structure and organizing those tasks in a spreadsheet, a few things should be clearer to you. First, you should have a set of discrete project tasks that ladder up to each of your milestones. You and your teammates will know exactly what needs to happen to reach your first milestone, and the milestones after that. Second, you're now in a good position to assign those tasks to members of the project team. Each person should have a clear understanding of the tasks they own and the order in which they need to complete them. Let's break down how to assign tasks. Tasks are typically assigned according to a person's role in the project. For example, in our Office Green scenario, the web designer is assigned to the task of mocking up the initial website design. You are assigned to the task of reviewing that design and providing feedback. And the designer is assigned to the task of implementing your feedback. A web developer will be assigned to the next task of developing the site itself. Sometimes your team will have multiple teammates working in the same type of role. To assign tasks between 2 or more team members with the same roles, you might take into consideration each person's familiarity with the tasks at hand. For example, if you have multiple web developers working on the new website, you might task one developer with creating the landing page and task the other developer with creating the Contact Us page. When assigning tasks, you should also consider each teammate's workload. Think about how much time they're meant to be spending on the project, compared to work outside the project that they might also be responsible for. It's important to keep everyone's workloads balanced. You'll want to make sure that a single teammate isn't assigned more work than others. You'll also want to make sure that no one is assigned more work than they can handle. When people feel overloaded, the quality of their work may suffer, or they might need more time to complete the number of tasks, putting the timeline and the overall project schedule at risk. As the project manager, you'll ensure that your teammates are clear on their assigned tasks. You can do this by assigning tasks with help from project management tools, like Asana, which I use a lot in my day-to-day role at Google. When you manage a project in Asana, you'll add tasks to represent actionable pieces of work needed to complete the project. As a best practice, it's good to start each task with a verb. For example, instead of just typing website, make clear the task is to mock up the website or add images to the website. Another thing to think about when assigning tasks is timeline. Be sure to add an assignee and a due date to each task so it's clear who's doing what by when. Finally, be sure to include as much detail surrounding the task as possible to avoid miscommunication. In Asana, you can click into the task details to add helpful information. Here, you can add a description, link to corresponding files or attachments, or even comment on the work related to the task. There's so many benefits to assigning tasks, but the biggest one is that it frees you up to focus on managing the project. This way, you can feel confident in the knowledge that your teammates are responsible for specific work. But there's also some less obvious benefits of assigning tasks. Let's explore these more now. One less obvious benefit of assigning tasks is that it creates a sense of personal responsibility for members of the team. When you assign a teammate to a task, you enter into an agreement with that person that they'll own the task until it's completed. Creating a sense of ownership for members of the team is important because it makes them feel more invested in the project. It also gives them space for personal growth. Plus, it supports your own skill building as a manager who's a supportive delegator. And on top of that, it keeps your team motivated and invested in completing their work on time. And while each team member should have a sense of responsibility for their assigned task, a complete sense of ownership might feel overwhelming for some teammates. If that's the case, it's a good idea for a project manager to encourage teammates to support one another on their tasks. This is also great for building overall team rapport. Got all that? Great. So to recap, you've learned about work breakdown structures and how to assign tasks to people on your team. Meet us in the next video for a recap on what we've covered over the past few videos. Hi again. Over the past few videos, we've discussed how to launch the planning phase of the project lifecycle. This is where you'll build your schedule, set your budget, and prepare your risk management plan. You also learned about an important part of the planning phase, the project kickoff meeting. This is a key moment where you can meet with your team and stakeholders to establish a shared vision, align on scope, build rapport, ask questions, and set expectations. We also discussed milestones, which are important points within the project schedule that indicate progress. And we also learned about tasks, which are activities that need to be accomplished within a set period of time. Then you learned about the value of milestones and how to set them. And you learned how to take those milestones, break them down into tasks, and record that information in a work breakdown structure. Next, we'll explore estimating time and setting a schedule. See you soon.
Hi, my name's Clenita, and I'm a Senior Engineering Program Manager at Google. So the planning phase of project management is essentially the time where you take a step back and you reflect on what's the scope of the project. So what are the problems that we need to solve? When you look at planning for projects, it's critical to understanding what you're building, who you're building for, and how long you have to build it. We look at our risk to make sure that we know what potentially could derail the project, and if possible, create mitigation that would circumvent any risks that we may come in contact with, or just be aware of things like scope. We also look at timing. Is there a deadline that we need to hit? And if so, do we have enough time to hit that deadline? We assess the work that needs to be done to understand if the work that needs to be done in order to meet the requirements fits into the timeline that we have. We also look at testing, what the testing plan looks like, what is success going to look like, so we know what the target is, so that when we hit the target and we validate it, we already know what metrics we expect to get. I'm a planner, it's just in my nature. Planning sets a tone for what we're actually doing together. It creates a sense of team. The planning also aligns everybody to understanding what it is we're all shooting for, what it is our goals are, what success is going to look like. It really is the place where we come together to ensure that we're all on the same page and we're all going in the same direction. When you don't have that, things get lost. You're not talking to the right people. You have miscommunications. Things get delayed and you don't really understand why. People aren't comfortable communicating what progress is happening. They really aren't comfortable in communicating when their problem comes up. So you want to just set a tone of we're all in this together. We're all going to be successful together. And we are going to run into roadblocks. We are going to run into problems, but we're going to work it out and figure it out as a team.
Hi, welcome back. In the previous section, we learned more about the planning phase, which is the second phase of the project lifecycle. We introduced you to kickoff meetings, which is the first meeting for the project team. We also discussed milestones, tasks, and how to set these within a project. Coming up, we'll explain why it is necessary to create and manage a project plan. We'll discuss the definition of a project plan, and we'll learn what typically goes into one. This includes the project schedule, which will help guide your team to the finish line. We'll also share how to use time estimation methods to prevent project failure. We'll introduce you to a few time estimation techniques which can help you build an accurate project schedule. And finally, we'll examine tools and best practices you can use to build out a project plan. Ready to get started? Meet me in the next video. A project plan can be useful for any project, big or small, since it helps you document the scope, tasks, milestones, and overall activities of the project. At the center of the project plan is the project schedule. The project schedule can help you estimate the amount of time it'll take to complete the project, and it can provide the team with a way to track the project's progress against your goals. What goes into a project plan may vary from company to company, but most plans contain these 5 basic elements. These are tasks, milestones, people, documentation, and time. Let's break those down. A project plan will include tasks and milestones, 2 topics we discussed before. Tasks are activities that need to be accomplished within a set period of time. They're assigned to different members of the team according to their roles and skills. And milestones are important points within the schedule that indicate progress. They usually signify the completion of a deliverable or phase of the project. A project plan will also include the people working on your team and their roles. It's important that each team member understands their role and the tasks they're responsible for completing. Ensuring that everyone is clear on their assigned task frees you up to focus on managing the project and creates a sense of personal responsibility for members of the team. A project plan is a good place to link to relevant documentation. This includes documents like your RACI chart, which helps to define roles and responsibilities for individuals on your team. You can also link to your charter, which clearly defines the project and outlines the details needed to reach your goals. Relevant documentation can also include documents like your budget and risk management plan. We'll discuss more about those later on in the course. Lastly, a project plan should include the estimated time that will be spent on the project. This forms the basis of the schedule, which is the anchor of your project plan. The estimated time includes dates on which tasks should be started and completed, and the dates when you hope to reach various milestones. It also includes the start and end dates of the project, which are important in determining which resources you'll need and when you'll need them. So, how exactly do you estimate how long these things will take? Meet me in the next video to find out. As the project manager, you aren't responsible for completing every task. What you are responsible for is identifying and helping assign those tasks, and then estimating how long they'll take to complete. These estimates come together to determine the overall project schedule. So, how do you estimate the amount of time a given task will take? You do this with the help of your team. Time estimation is a prediction of the total amount of time required to complete a task. Effort estimation is a prediction of the amount and difficulty of active work required to complete a task. Effort estimation differs from time estimation in that effort quantifies the amount of time it will take a person to complete work on a task. On the flip side, time refers to the overall duration of the task, from start to finish. That includes inactive time. Here's an example. The effort estimation for painting a wall might be 30 minutes, but time estimation might be 24 hours. That's because, in addition to the 30 minutes of active painting time, there are also 23.5 hours of inactive drying time. It's important to understand the difference between time estimation and effort estimation, because it can help you be more efficient with your available resources. If there's idle time baked into a given task, your teammate is effectively free to do other things. A painter can do other tasks while the wall is drying, like painting the mailbox or the window trim. An unrealistic effort estimate can negatively impact a project schedule. Generally, this happens when you underestimate the amount of time it will take to complete a task. Often, the culprit for underestimating effort is optimism. And listen, optimism is a wonderful trait for a project manager to possess, but too much optimism can lead you to overlook potential risks that could set your plans behind schedule. Though it might be tempting to make the optimistic assumption that tasks will be executed exactly according to plan, there is always a possibility that there will be setbacks. So, how do you try to avoid making unrealistic effort estimates? You can do this by communicating with teammates assigned to each task. Your teammates will have the most realistic understanding of the amount of work required to complete a task, and should be able to provide you with the best estimate. Let's imagine this scenario in the context of our Plant Pals project at Office Green. As a reminder, you're launching a new service to provide top Office Green customers with small, low-maintenance plants that they can place on their desks. You might assume that creating a contact list of top customers is relatively straightforward and can be completed in a single day. But it's important to really consider certain subtasks required to complete work in your planning. Subtasks refer to smaller tasks that are required to complete a larger task. For example, this might include meeting with the global sales team to identify clients, gathering contact information, determining client language preferences, and building a spreadsheet to house this information. Asking the teammate assigned to the task for their estimate is likely to yield a more accurate estimation, since they'll have a deeper understanding of the work and the nuances of what's required to complete the task. You might learn that creating the contact list may take 2 days to complete, which could be double the time you originally expected. Of course, you can usually ask follow-up questions, or even gently push back on their estimate as needed. Later on, we'll discuss more of the techniques you can use to get more accurate estimates from your teammates. Now, even though task owners tend to have the strongest sense of how much time they'll need to complete a task, the fact is that effort estimates are just that, estimates, meaning that sometimes those estimates won't be accurate. For example, in our Plant Pals scenario, your teammate estimates that it will take 2 days to create a contact list of top customers. But let's say that the sales team is out of the office for a team building exercise and unable to meet about the client list until after the weekend. This will create a task delay. And as a result, the original estimate is no longer accurate. Luckily, there's a helpful tool called a buffer that you can use during the planning phase to protect against inaccurate effort estimates. A buffer is extra time added to the end of a task or a project to account for unexpected slowdowns or delays in work progress. Buffers are important because they can provide some leeway, just in case your time and effort estimates turn out to fall a bit short. With a buffer, you can add extra time into your schedule, and your project shouldn't fall off track when task delays inevitably arise. There are 2 types of buffers you can use when planning your schedule: task buffers and project buffers. First, we have task buffers, which refer to extra time tacked onto a specific task. Task buffers should be used primarily for tasks that are out of the project team's control. For example, you might ask a potential plant vendor to provide you with a cost estimate by Monday. You might assign them this deadline knowing that you won't actually need the estimate until Thursday. The time between Monday and Thursday is your buffer, and it provides your team with extra time just in case the vendor sends their estimates to you a day or 2 late. Task buffers should be used more sparingly for tasks within the project team's control. For example, you might choose to add buffers only to tasks that are difficult to complete or that have an element of unpredictability, like the length of time it will take plants to grow. Adding a buffer to every task could lengthen your project schedule unnecessarily, leaving you, your team, and your stakeholders with an unrealistic timeline. This is where project buffers come in handy. Project buffers differ from task buffers in that they provide extra time to the overall project schedule. Rather than adding a buffer to every task, you can add extra time as a buffer towards the end of your project schedule. Then you can use that extra time, 2 to 3 days for example, as needed throughout the project. For instance, if a teammate misses a deadline here and there, the project buffer gives you space in the overall schedule to make up for lost time. I use buffers often in my day-to-day role at Google. For example, on a recent project at Google, I was working with a new hire who was great at coding, but kept missing deadlines. I realized they weren't giving themselves enough buffer time to do testing. I started to ask questions about their current workload and the complexity of their tasks. And based on their answers to those questions, I was able to gather insights about their work and determine where I needed to add buffer to their tasks. Ultimately, my goal is to ensure that I'm setting a realistic timeline for the project. After all, if you hit your project goal 2 months later than expected, your organization may not consider the project a success. Time estimation, effort estimation, and buffers can help you build realistic plans for reaching the project goal. Hi again. Okay, so we've discussed time estimation, which is a prediction of the total amount of time that will be required to complete a task. And we've also discussed effort estimation, which is a prediction of the amount and difficulty of active work required to complete a task. These techniques can help you estimate the length of time it will take to complete a task. Once you have that information, you'll need to determine if you have the right number of people to get the work done. To figure this out, you can use a technique called capacity planning. First, let's define capacity. Capacity refers to the amount of work that the people or resources assigned to the project can reasonably complete in a set period of time. A person can only do so much, and it's important to keep in mind each person's capacity when assigning work. This is where capacity planning comes in. Capacity planning refers to the act of allocating people and resources to project tasks and determining whether or not you have the necessary resources required to complete the work on time. During this process, you might find that you need more resources to speed up the project timeline, like a second web developer or a third writer. Let's imagine capacity planning in the context of our Plant Pals project at Office Green. If you know that you'll need to deliver plants to 100 customers over a period of 5 days, then you'll need to determine if you've hired enough delivery drivers to meet that deadline. If one driver averages 4 deliveries within an 8-hour workday, then you know you'll need to hire at least 5 drivers to complete the work on time. Even if a person on your project team is spending 100% of their time at work on your project, they'll have limited capacity for the amount of work they should be expected to complete each day. Between meetings, unexpected urgent tasks, and other elements of a typical workday, there's only so much each person can complete. So, how do you decide where a teammate should focus their priorities and make the most of their capacity? You can prioritize their time by plotting the critical path of your project timeline. The critical path refers to the list of project milestones that you must reach in order to meet the project goal on schedule, as well as the mandatory tasks that contribute to the completion of each milestone. Anything else is considered off the critical path. For example, tasks on the critical path for launching Project Plant Pals might include hiring plant vendors, developing a new website, and fulfilling deliveries. A task like adding flowers to your product lineup is nice to have, but might not have much impact on the overall success of your project, because this task isn't crucial to your launch. These tasks aren't part of the critical path. To summarize, your critical path includes the bare minimum number of tasks and milestones you need to reach your project goal. If your team is unable to complete any of those tasks on time, that might result in a project delay. To determine the critical path of a project, you'd start by listing all the tasks required to complete the project and the milestones they feed into. This is a perfect time to think back to your work breakdown structure, or WBS, which is a chart that sorts all the milestones and tasks of a project into a hierarchy according to the order in which they need to be completed. This includes a detailed overview of every project task. Then, you determine which tasks on the list absolutely can't begin until another task is complete. This is called a dependency. and we'll discuss this topic in more detail later on. Next, you'll work with your team to make time estimates for each task and map each task from start to finish. The longest path is your critical path. There are a few factors that can impact capacity and capacity planning. First, you need to be able to identify which tasks can happen in parallel, which means they can happen at the same time as other tasks. You will also need to identify which tasks can happen sequentially, meaning they must happen in a specific order. When you identify which tasks can happen in parallel, it helps you create efficiencies within your project schedule by demonstrating where you can complete multiple tasks at the same time. Identifying sequential tasks help you identify the tasks that you need to prioritize early on in the project. For example, a sequential task for your Plant Pals project may include needing budget approval before hiring a vendor. And 2 parallel tasks might include hiring delivery drivers and the development of a website. These tasks have no relationship to one another as they focus on different portions of the project and can be completed by different members of the team. That means that one task can begin even if the other task hasn't been completed. And so the work to complete these tasks can happen at the same time. You also need to determine which project tasks have a fixed start date. A fixed start date refers to the date on which you must start work on your task in order to achieve your goal. Identifying whether or not your tasks have a fixed start dates can help with capacity planning because it helps ensure that you'll have the right number of people available to complete tasks on time. For example, let's imagine that your contract says you'll need to deliver 100 plants on a specific date. That means that the task of picking up those plants has a fixed start date of 1 day prior to delivery. Alternatively, some tasks might have an earliest start date. An earliest start date refers to the earliest date in which you can begin working on a task. Identifying an earliest start date can set accurate expectations for when vendors and team members will be up and running on the project. This can help you plan your work and prioritize your work accordingly. For example, if you're working with a new vendor, you need to wait until contracts are signed and the purchase order is approved and created before the vendor can start. Let's say that, at Office Green, this process can take about 3 weeks. Based on this information, you can determine that the earliest start date for your vendor will be 3 weeks from the kickoff meeting with your vendor. Another best practice for capacity planning and creating the critical path includes identifying if a task has float, also sometimes known as slack. Float refers to the amount of time you can wait to begin a task before it impacts the project schedule and threatens the project outcome. These are high priority tasks that have low to no wiggle room. This helps reinforce what is and what is not on your critical path. For instance, tasks on the critical path should have 0 float, meaning there is no room for delays, and tasks that do have float are not a part of the critical path. For example, the shipment of plants to a priority customer who's requested their delivery on a specific date is a task that has 0 float. Great. You've now learned a bit more about how to define capacity, capacity planning, and critical path. We also discussed the techniques used to identify critical path in a project and the various factors that can impact capacity and capacity planning. In the next video, we'll continue learning how to create viable estimates in a project plan. You will also find out how your soft skills can help the effectiveness of your team. Meet you there. Hi again. Ready to get back into it? Let's go. Time estimation, effort estimation, and capacity planning are all helpful techniques for creating your project schedule. And at the center of all this planning is your team. Throughout the schedule planning process, you're working with teammates to gather estimates, and you're taking into account each person's capacity when building the project schedule. It makes sense to involve your teammates at this stage. After all, the person assigned to the given task is likely to have the best sense of how long it will take to complete that task. They'll also have the best sense of their own capacity for taking on the work. But these conversations are a two-way discussion, and you'll need to tap into your soft skills to get the most accurate estimate from your team. Soft skills are personal characteristics that help people work effectively with others. These include crucial communication and interpersonal skills we've discussed over the course of this program. Soft skills can be important when trying to understand what might be blocking someone's ability to do their best work. Let's go over 3 ways to use soft skills and gather accurate estimates from your teammates. These are asking the right questions, negotiating effectively, and practicing empathy. Let's start with asking the right questions. Think of conversations around the time estimation as a kind of interview. You're connecting with your teammates to learn more about how they work on specific tasks, and you'll use this information to build your schedule. To aim to get the most relevant information from these conversations, you'll want to be certain that you're asking effective, open-ended questions that lead to the answers you're seeking. An open-ended question is a question that cannot be answered with a yes or a no. The answer provides the relevant details of what you need to know. Let's imagine this in the context of your project at Office Green. You've discussed the design of a new website with your web designer, and you'd like to know how long it will take them to mock up designs for your review. Now let's say you start the conversation by asking a question like, can you complete the mock-ups in 1 week? This is a closed-ended question and might elicit a simple yes or no answer, which doesn't tell you much about the task of designing a website or about your teammates' working style. Now, imagine if you had started this conversation with an open-ended question. For example, you might ask the web designer something like, how long does it typically take you to mock up a website design like this one? This is an open-ended question and is more likely to elicit a more detailed response. From there, you can ask follow-up questions like, how complex are the steps to complete this task? What are the risks associated with this task? And when do you think you can have this ready? By asking your teammates effective, open-ended questions about their assigned tasks, you can learn more about how they work and what they do. As you have more of these conversations, you'll develop a better sense of your teammates' roles and their tasks, and you'll be able to rely less on your team to make accurate estimates. Another way to use soft skills to gather estimates from teammates is to negotiate effectively. Part of your job as the project manager is to bridge the gap between high-level goals of the project and the day-to-day perspective of your team. While your project might be your number 1 priority, it's possible that people on your project team have competing priorities on other teams to keep track of as well. Negotiating effectively can help you influence a team member to make your project their priority by collaborating to find an outcome that works for everyone. For example, let's imagine that the website designer estimates it will take them 2 weeks to mock up the website design for review, but perhaps you were hoping that their estimate might be closer to 1 week. To arrive at an estimate that works for both you and the designer, you might gently challenge the estimate by asking follow-up questions. Perhaps you'd ask if their estimate includes mocking up designs for multiple pages. If so, you might ask if the designer is able to share 1 or 2 pages with you sooner than their proposed deadline. By asking questions, you can determine if their estimate is flexible, or if you need to bring in an additional designer to support the schedule. By negotiating effectively with your teammates, you can create a sense of shared ownership over the project outcomes and create a schedule that aligns with everyone's workload. Now let's discuss the value of practicing empathy. Empathy refers to a person's ability to relate to the thoughts and feelings of others. Practicing empathy at work can be a very effective way to build trust with your team. Your teammates are humans, and each person can only do so much. When you're discussing estimates with the team, you might practice empathy by asking each person about their workload, including work outside of your project and the overall work-life balance. You might also ask if they've scheduled vacation or leave during the duration of the project, or if there are crucial holidays in which they won't be working. This can help you avoid assigning tasks when teammates are unable to complete them on time. For example, the web designer might tell you that they're also designing a website for another team at Office Green, and that the timeline for both projects overlap. So, to avoid overloading your designer with work, you might work with the other project manager to balance workloads across the teams. People like to feel their work is valued. So part of empathy is remembering to always be appreciative of the work, collaboration, and support that you're getting from the team. So to recap, asking the right questions, negotiating effectively, and practicing empathy can help you get viable, accurate estimates from your teammates about project tasks. Coming up, we'll discuss putting these estimates to good use in the project plan.
Hi, my name is Angel, and I'm a program manager at Google. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, and my first boss out of school said, "You're an okay engineer, but your people skills are off the charts. And having a technical background and having really good people skills is hard to find." Soft skills, to me, have a lot to do with emotional intelligence. So being able to read other people, and then ultimately really knowing yourself and being able to read the team, read what they need, but then at the same time, what am I doing? Either influencing the team in a good way, in a bad way, or just a different way. Just asking sometimes people that don't usually kind of raise their hand to give input goes a long way, because a lot of times the folks that are maybe a little more quiet are genuinely thinking about the problem and may have a lot of insights that if you didn't kind of catch on that or ask them, you could miss out. And so to me, soft skills just means just really understanding kind of the emotional needs of the team. And that can really help with, whether it's estimations or costs, whether it be labor or dollar wise, get kind of the full view from the team of what that might look like. When it comes to task estimation and time estimations, the other thing is just asking good questions. So not just, I need you to go faster, but really saying, hey, how much faster could you go if I gave you this? What is stopping you from going faster? What teams would you need to get involved to kind of help this, right? Or, hey, we have an issue. Are there similar issues in other parts of this project? And do we need to get together in a larger group to kind of bring that together? I think as a program manager, that's really your role, is to kind of see patterns in a project and see kind of where things are either slowing down or at a complete stop, and having those soft skills to be able to bring the team together to solve that problem, and to even just see it, right? Just to acknowledge that there is a problem, and instead of, blaming, is really just digging in and kind of, how do we learn from this? How do we fix this? How do we move on? Some of the things that also help is just relating to your team members. And if you've either been in a similar situation or just trying to understand what their process is. Sometimes just having people walk through the estimate out loud can sometimes come up with realizations of, oh, we could save more time or could improve this just by talking it out. I've been a project manager, for machines that make labels, to locomotive engines, to how you make plywood. So project management skills, don't necessarily need to be all about kind of the field that you're in. It's really more about kind of the method and the process and kind of how you structure a team and get people to work together.
Hi again. In the previous videos, we took you through a few different time estimation methods. Now you can relate how to use time estimation methods to prevent project failure. Let's discuss how to pull all of this information into a project plan to help you and your team stay on track to meet your goals. Even the simplest projects can benefit from a clear plan, and an anchor of a good project plan is a clear schedule containing all the tasks of a project, their owners, and when they need to be completed. Once you have your project schedule, you can build a solid plan around that schedule using tools like spreadsheets and Asana. We'll explain these tools in a few moments. But first, let's discuss building a project schedule. There are many helpful tools that you can use to create a project schedule, but let's focus on one that we sometimes use here at Google called a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is a horizontal bar chart that maps out a project schedule. Fun fact, the chart gets its name from American engineer Henry Gantt, who helped popularize the chart in the early 1900s. So, why did people working in project management find this chart useful? Well, it's a highly visual representation of a project's tasks, with clear breakdowns of who's responsible for the work and when those tasks are due. For many people, a visual aid that builds upon written directions can be a helpful way to understand and synthesize the work they need to do, when they need to complete it, and how their individual tasks connect to the other tasks in a project. Gantt charts are almost like calendars. They feature the start and end dates of each task, and the bars align with how much time is devoted to each of those tasks. For example, let's say that your teammate Leon is tasked with creating a project charter, and another teammate, Kylie, is tasked with reviewing and editing the charter when Leon is finished. Using a Gantt chart, you'll use colored bars to illustrate the days that they'll be working on these tasks. With this method, you and the rest of your team can determine that Leon has Friday, Monday, and Tuesday to work on the chart, and Kylie has Wednesday to complete any revisions. The bars cascade down the chart to illustrate the passing of time, and the blocks of time in which the tasks are completed. Gantt charts can be a helpful tool for tracking schedules. But what kinds of tools can you use to make a Gantt chart? There are a few options, but we're going to focus on the straightforward spreadsheet. Creating a Gantt chart in a spreadsheet is pretty simple. You can organize your left columns by items like task title, task owner, start date, due date, duration, and percent of task complete. This is a great place to list the tasks and milestones previously identified in a work breakdown structure. You'll include relevant information in the rows below, organized by start date. On the right side of your sheet, you'll order your columns by the weeks estimated to complete the project from start to finish. In the rows below that, you'll include bars representing the dates when certain tasks will take place. Kinda neat, right? Spreadsheets are helpful here because they can hold more information than just the Gantt chart. Though the project schedule serves as the central component of the project plan, you can use separate tabs on your spreadsheet to house or link to other documents you'll want to include in your plan, like a RACI chart or a project charter. You may also opt to include your plans for risk management and communication here too. With a spreadsheet, you can simply add a tab for your documents. Keeping every document for the project in one spreadsheet saves time, helps everyone stay organized, and reduces the burden of having to search through emails for information. Alternatively, you can also opt to use a digital document to link out all the relevant documents. While Gantt charts are a useful tool, they are far from the only option for your project plan, and there are plenty of reasons why this form of documentation might not work for you or your project team. For a simple project, you might find that your team responds better to a digital document that features a list of tables or tasks, their owners, due dates, and links to other relevant planning documents. Or perhaps your team works best with Kanban boards, which uses cards to track and visualize the progress of your tasks. Regardless of your chosen tool, if your plan includes the project's goals, its tasks, owners, start and end dates, and relevant planning documentation, then you'll be able to keep everyone on the same page. Now you know a bit more about the tools that can be used to create a project schedule. Up next, we'll discuss best practices for building a project plan. Meet you in the next video. Hi again. Earlier, you learned about creating a project plan based on a project schedule that lists all of the milestones, tasks, and deadlines of a project, and that clearly outlines the people responsible for each task. You also learned about Gantt charts, which are simple visual ways to create your schedule. So, how can you help make sure that your plan works for you and your team? Let's discuss 5 best practices for building a great project plan that will remain useful throughout the execution and closing phases of your project. Those include ensuring careful review of project deliverables, milestones, and tasks, giving yourself time to plan, recognizing and planning for the inevitable, things will go wrong, staying curious, and championing your plan. First, you'll want to ensure that you've carefully reviewed the project's deliverables, milestones, and tasks. During the initiation phase, you'll recall that you created a project charter with important information regarding your project, like your goal, scope, and deliverables. When a project enters the planning phase, your plans become more granular. Let's discuss this in the context of your project at Office Green. In your plan, you need to break this information down further. You're creating a new website for this service, so you'll need to break that deliverable down into smaller milestones, like kicking off a meeting with the web developer and gaining stakeholder approval. And those milestones will break down into smaller tasks, like mocking up a design of the new website and developing a landing page. Each of these tasks will be assigned to a teammate and given a start and end date. Now, a new website isn't the only Project Plant Power's deliverable. You will need to break down every deliverable into milestones and tasks to ensure that you and your team have a clear picture of what needs to be done to meet your project's goals. Your plan revolves around completing each and every tiny task, so you should take your time to get this piece right. This brings me to my second tip. Give yourself time to plan. There's a reason that planning is its own phase of the project lifecycle. It's a time-intensive process, especially for larger projects with multiple deliverables. Planning gives you and your team some time to think realistically about what your team can and cannot accomplish within a certain time frame. You're not a machine, and neither are your teammates. There are limits to the amount of work any one person can do in a given time frame. Using the strategies that we've shared earlier, like effort estimation and capacity planning, can help you and your team get a realistic sense of how long the project will take and when you'll be able to hit your milestones. It's also important to allow for buffer time since projects rarely go exactly as planned. Later in the project, you'll be grateful that you initially planned for some built-in flexibility around timing. That leads nicely into my third tip. Recognize and plan for the inevitable. Things will go wrong. Even with thorough planning, your projects will still experience unexpected setbacks and bumps in the road. You can't plan for every problem, but the team can identify the risks that will most likely occur and create plans to prevent or mitigate those risks. As we mentioned before, Buff is a helpful tool for mitigating issues related to slowdowns in progress. You'll learn more about how to create a risk management plan that goes into your project plan later on in this course. On to my fourth tip. Stay curious. Though you may be the sole expert on your project overall, it's extremely unlikely that you're an expert on every task of the project. That's why it's so important to sit down with your teammates during the planning phase and ask lots and lots of questions. As we mentioned earlier, asking your teammates questions about their work can give you deeper insights into their tasks for the project. Their input will help you build a stronger plan, and the back and forth dialogue will help you build trust between you and your teammates. To keep the project running smoothly, it's also important to understand the expectations, priorities, risk assessments, and communication styles of your stakeholders and vendors. For example, you might ask stakeholders how to best keep them in the loop on the project's plans. And you might ask your vendors about their availability to complete work for the project. Now, on to my fifth tip. Champion your plan. While deciding how to organize your plan, you'll want to ask yourself a few questions, like, can your teammates use the tool you used to build your plan? Is the information clear enough for your stakeholders? Will using this plan as a single source of truth save your team and stakeholders the time and energy when they need to find information on the project? If the answer to each of these questions is a strong yes, then you're on the right track. To achieve buy-in from your teammates and stakeholders on your project plan, champion it. Tell your team why it benefits them to stay on top of the plan. By doing so, you may influence your teammates to stay on track and update the plan regularly. So to recap, you can set your project plan up for success if you review your deliverables, milestones, and tasks. Give yourself time to plan, prepare for things to go wrong, stay curious, and champion your plan once it's finalized. Coming up, we'll recap what you've learned over the past few videos. See you there. Nice work. Let's recap what we've just covered. First, we took you through why it's necessary to create and manage a project plan. At the center of the project plan is a project schedule, and we discussed methods for determining realistic time and effort estimates for each task. You also learned more about the power of soft skills to help you gather time and effort estimates from members of your team. We also introduced you to a Gantt chart, which is a useful tool for visualizing a project schedule. And I shared my best practices for creating a project plan that will serve as a useful source of information throughout the planning phase and execution phase. Coming up, we'll take you through managing costs and budgets. See you soon. Welcome back. Previously, we learned about creating and managing a project plan and using time estimation to prevent project failure. Coming up, we're going to shift the discussion to the inner workings of a project budget. So let's discuss money. As mentioned before, a lot of project management skills may overlap with common skills that you already use in your everyday life. And you may already have some kind of budgeting experience. Budgeting in the project management world is a complex process involving many different parties and documentation. I'm going to teach you how to create and manage a real-world project budget. We'll discuss the many components of a budget and how stakeholders play a role in the budgeting process. You'll learn about the importance of procurement in project management. If you don't know what that means yet, sit tight. You'll understand that concept soon enough. You'll also learn about vendor management and procurement in both the agile and the traditional methodology settings. There will be several new concepts around legal and contractual documentation introduced throughout, such as NDAs, RFPs, and SOWs. You'll learn that project managers are fluent in acronyms, and soon you will be too. I will explain each of these acronyms coming up. We'll also teach you about the role that legal teams and ethics play in procurement. I'll give you a hint. It's a big one. Starting a new project and sourcing materials and vendors without considering the ethical implications can get project managers into hot water. So you'll learn more about legal teams and ethics to help you avoid these tricky situations. The best part? You'll get pretty hands-on here, since you'll create your own documentation using our templates. Are you ready? We'll get started in the next video. Let's get back to budgeting. You may already set a budget to help you stay on track with your monthly expenses in your personal life. Many people do, because it allows them to feel prepared and in control of their finances. The same is true about project budgeting. Project budgeting is a little more complex than your personal budget. We'll help you understand and go a little deeper into what a project budget entails. A project budget is the estimated monetary resources needed to achieve the project's goals and objectives. When reviewing a project budget, you need to consider all of the potential and projected costs needed to complete the project. You break the budget down by milestones, which are important points within the project schedule that indicate progress and usually signifies the completion of a deliverable or phase of the project, and list activities and tasks alongside their associated costs. This ensures that you calculate the correct expenses for a particular period of time. This is considered a forecast. A forecast for your project budget is a cost estimate or a prediction over a period of time. You'll frequently review your project budget, and it will evolve throughout the project lifecycle. These budgets usually contain items such as labor, operating costs, and costs associated with obtaining necessary materials like hardware, software, or equipment. The importance of a project budget focuses on more than just saving money. In project management, a budget is considered a deliverable. It is a success metric. The project budget is a tool to communicate exactly what is needed and when it is needed with stakeholders. The budget will have a direct effect on the company's financial viability. So, as you can probably tell by now, it's an integral part of project management. Budget creation takes place in the initiation phase of your project. Keep in mind that the budget will be adjusted as needed throughout the life cycle of the project. Depending on your role in the company, you won't always be the sole creator of the budget. Your ownership over things like budget and vendor relationship may vary, depending on factors such as size of the company or support team or the team organizational chart. Although you may not always manage the budget from start to finish, budget and milestones go hand in hand. So it's important for you to know the ins and outs of the budget throughout the project. As a project manager, you may be tasked with obtaining approvals for spending. Most companies have a signing or spending policy. This usually outlines who has the authority to commit resources or incur costs or other obligations on behalf of the company. This is important because you won't be able to continue with some of your deliverables or action items if you don't know how much certain activities will cost and whether you have the necessary funds available. It wouldn't make any sense to rent a property without checking on the rental costs first, right? That's especially true if the rental price is higher than your budget. The same thinking is applicable for your project budgeting. The budgeting process usually happens in conjunction with the scheduling process, because the steps of the scheduling process are highly dependent on the costs. The project manager will collaborate with people on the project to create their estimations. For the most part, after the cost estimating process has been completed, it's common for the project sponsor or another key stakeholder to review and approve estimation costs and, if necessary, adjust and reallocate funds for the project. This could mean that either the CEO or the COO are the ones giving the okay or the final sign-off. For example, in our Office Green project, the Director of Product has sign-off approval. As we mentioned before, the project manager will most likely need some kind of sign-off from the finance department. This may vary from company to company, so just make sure you're aware of your company's processes. Project budgeting is never a one-size-fits-all operation. As the project manager, you will have to prioritize where you allocate funds within the project to ensure maximum output. Ultimately, most projects are created to improve workforce productivity, increase revenue, or attempt to save costs within an organization. Budgeting is one of the most important aspects of project management, and when you start, to stay on budget is one of the trickiest tasks. It's important not to go over budget and cost the company extra money. And it's equally important not to be under budget either, since that might affect the company's budget for the next year. When it comes to high-profile businesses, such as publicly traded companies like Google, or public sector organizations such as your local education department, they may have a requirement to report on their financial performance to shareholders or auditors. Going too far over or under budget will change the way the company budgets for the next year, potentially leaving you with less money to work with in the future. In other words, a project manager must show the requested amount of money was used in order to secure enough budget for future projects. For smaller businesses, there may be a tighter budget, in which case it's especially critical to be careful about spending too much money on a project than initially allocated. It's really helpful to your overall success as a project manager to understand budgeting. So in the next video, we're going to learn the specific ins and outs of what's included in a budget. See you soon. Now that you have an understanding of what a budget is, let's discuss some specific components in a budget. There are so many things to factor into project budgeting. Unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as a company saying, we have $5,000, so that's our budget. When you go to the grocery store, in the same way that you don't determine how much apples will cost, businesses can't just decide that they want to spend $200 on a project if the market rate for a project of the same caliber is $2,000. Instead, project managers must account for understanding stakeholder needs, budgeting for surplus expenses, maintaining adaptability, and reviewing and reforecasting throughout the entire project. And these are only some examples of what you'll need to take into account. Let's imagine some of these factors in our Office Green project. In terms of understanding stakeholder needs, It's important to know exactly what stakeholders expect from this project in order to deliver. As a company, the ultimate goal is typically to make a profit and to save money and time. So, the project sponsor, the director of product in this case, needs the project to come in at a certain cost in order to make profit. As the project manager, you'll also need to budget for surprise expenses. Let's say several planters arrive from the vendor broken and cracked. Maybe the planters cracked during delivery process and it isn't the vendor's fault. In that case, you'll have to order some additional planters to fulfill orders, and that may be an added cost. As your project continues along, you'll have to review your budget and sometimes reforecast, which means creating a separate revised budget based on how your project is tracking. Keeping on top of the budget will help you stay organized, and reforecasting is a way to recalibrate the budget if necessary. As the project manager at Office Screen, you might find that you need to shift costs to different resources and categories within your project budget. Maybe you initially overestimated the cost of plants from the vendor and underestimated the costs of marketing your new launch. So, you can reallocate these dollars as necessary. That's a great example of how to review and reforecast. There are several factors to consider when creating a budget, including resource cost rates, reserve analysis, contingency budget, and cost of quality. You'll need to determine resource cost rates. Resource cost rates are exactly what they sound like, the cost of a resource. Some examples of resources are labor, tools, equipment, materials, and software. So you'll want to ask yourself, how much will each of these resources cost the company? Sometimes a project can be derailed because the project manager didn't adequately include funds for reserves or buffers. Performing a reserve analysis will help you account for any buffer funds you may need. A reserve analysis is a method to check for remaining project resources. In performing a reserve analysis, you'll review all potential risks to your project and determine if you need to add buffer funds. These funds are necessary because new costs that you didn't originally foresee will arise. This is also known as contingency budget. Contingency budget, in the context of project management, is money that is included to cover potentially unforeseen events that aren't accounted for in a cost estimate. The purpose is to compensate for the uncertainty that occurs in cost and time estimates, as well as unpredictable risk exposure. The cost of quality refers to all of the costs that are incurred to prevent issues with products, processes, or tasks. The cost of quality includes prevention costs, appraisal costs, internal failure costs, and external failure costs. Once you've applied these factors, resource cost rates, reserve analysis, contingency budget, and the cost of quality into your budget, you can estimate what your project might cost. Remember, your budget will most likely change. Starting with an initial estimate is one way to ensure that you are at least on track. And it's okay if your budget does change. That's why we review and reforecast. Hopefully you're starting to notice the framework for creating a budget. In the next lesson, we'll begin to piece a budget together. Let's put all of your notes and newly acquired knowledge to use. See you soon. Now that we've learned about budgeting, let's find out how it all works together. By now, we know that project budgets help to control costs throughout the duration of the project. They help project managers establish the main objectives of their project and keep them within a reasonable framework to ensure that project makes financial sense for the company. So what's the best way to start making a project budget? You'll find that as you get further along in the process, there are various resources and tactics that you can use to make sure you aren't overestimating or underestimating. You'll use techniques like researching historical data, leveraging experts, the bottom-up approach, confirming accuracy, and setting your baseline. For starters, you can always review past projects that are similar to yours to get an idea of what your project could entail. We'll refer to that as referring to historical data. This way, you can find out what past project managers did right and wrong. The more experienced you become as a project manager, the more historical data you'll have to draw upon, and the better your estimations will be. In a similar vein, you can leverage experts in the field. To leverage something means to use it to its maximum advantage. So leveraging experts means gathering their insights to do something more effectively. Reaching out to colleagues who worked on a similar project in the past will be a great resource for you as an entry-level project manager. If you're asking someone outside of your company for advice, be sure to avoid sharing any confidential company information with them. Another approach to take is the bottom-up approach. This means thinking about all the parts of a project from the beginning to the end, including making a list of every material, resource, contract worker, or anything that comes with an associated cost, and adding all of that together. You should also ask the vendors you're thinking of working with for quotes, so you can get a rough estimate of how much their work will cost. After you've created your budget with these resources, you'll want to double-check everything to confirm accuracy. Of course, the work doesn't stop once you've created the budget. Next, you'll have to set the baseline. Your baseline is the dollar amount that you'll use to measure against to find out if you're on track or not, and to measure the success of your project. Once you've set your baseline, you'll have to revisit that number and adjust it to match where the project is currently. Making adjustments in real time is something you have to do a lot as a project manager. The size of the project and company will determine how often you should re-examine and update the budget. Creating a thorough budget is important to the success of your project. With Project Plant Pals, we suggest breaking the project down into tasks. That's the bottom-up approach. From there, we estimate the cost of each item, add those estimates together, add contingency and tax, and seek overall approval on our budget from our key stakeholders. Since we're creating a new service, we'll need to hire designers and developers to build out the website and develop the app for our customers. Once these tasks are laid out, you'll have to negotiate employee allocations, contractor rates, and shop around for vendors and delivery services. This will help you assign cost estimates to each task. Now that the tasks have been broken down and assigned, you'll need to account for material costs. Do your team members and stakeholders need equipment? Maybe an employee with a disability requires modifications to accommodate or enhance their workplace. Maybe some remote workers need the hardware and accessories necessary to work from home. This is where you'll include everything from computers to software related to the launch. Will you need storage space for miscellaneous plants or supplies? Miscellaneous is a term that we use to represent additional items that are not included in any of the other areas. Usually they are minor items or items where there are only one or two of them and that they are not a major budget line. Be sure to add these items to your expenses. You'll also need a few more line items. Start with the fixed cost that won't change over the course of the project. Let's say you're paying to advertise the web developer role to a job board. It may cost you about $50 to post that job description. That's an example of a fixed, one-time cost. Next, you'll need a line item for things like travel expenses and meals. And finally, we'll want to account for buffers and reserves. You'll need to factor in unexpected costs that may come up later on. Be sure to leave yourself with some buffer room. We've chosen to account for 5% of the overall project budget as our buffer. This is a standard practice, and depending upon how much detail you know about the project already, you can raise or lower your percentage for reserves. The client needs to be aware of this buffer in case spending starts to become excessive, in which case you need to problem solve with the client and agree to adjust the scope. You'll want to include a planned cost versus actual cost column too. This way, you can keep track of your cost every step of the way. We'll provide you with concrete budget templates in the readings associated with this section, so you can fully immerse yourself in the process. Remember, every project will have an estimated cost and a final cost. Your goal is to get your estimated cost as close to the final cost as possible. You may have to recalibrate your estimations during the project. That's when the estimated cost to complete the project comes in. The final cost of your project differs from the forecasted or estimated cost if you weren't exactly on target with your budget. Remember, while your goal is to get as close to the original estimate as possible, that won't always be the case. Each time you're placed on a new project, it will be helpful to look back on the final costs of previous projects and see how close you came to your goal. Now you know the best way to create a project budget. Up next, we're going to talk about maintaining a budget. See you there. Now that you have an idea of how to create a budget, we're going to discuss how you'll manage that budget and explore some challenges that you might face, like being under or over budget. As mentioned previously, you'll want to check in on your budget regularly. But what exactly does that mean? What are you checking for? How can you tell if you're staying within your budget or not? Monitoring the budget is crucial for a project manager to enforce accountability in terms of spending. By monitoring your budget regularly, you'll be able to tell if the plans you set into action are actually being implemented on both a financial and operational level. As you may recall from a previous video, a milestone is an important point within the project schedule that indicates progress and usually signifies the completion of a deliverable or phase of the project. Milestones are a metric for tracking progress in the project. Milestones are a great opportunity to re-review the budget to identify if anything needs to be reset or revisited throughout the project. That said, milestones can act as a checkpoint for budget management and payment. You may have agreed in your contract that you get paid at certain milestones rather than at the end of the project. Fixed contracts are usually paid for when certain milestones are reached, whereas time and materials contracts are usually paid for monthly based on the hours worked and other fees associated with the work, like travel and meals. As you monitor your budget, you'll want to be on top of cost control. Cost control is a practice where a project manager identifies factors that might impact their budget and then creates effective actions to minimize variances. Think of it this way: it's proactive budget management. It is much better to be proactive with your budget than to be reactive with your budget. If you are reacting instead of anticipating, then you may already have some kind of problem with the budget. In order to control costs, you should establish a sign-off plan and inform the appropriate stakeholders of any changes that occur. You'll have to ask yourself which stakeholders or sponsor will be approving the contractor or vendor timesheets. What about invoices? You'll also need to make sure any changes within the project budget are agreed upon. For example, you shouldn't approve a new cost or item if it hasn't been agreed upon or if it isn't within the scope. And you shouldn't be spending money if it's not pre-approved by your stakeholder or project sponsor. It is also important to make sure there's good business case before bringing it to the stakeholder. You'll also need to manage changes as they're made. This involves updating forecasts or estimates and tracking everything. You never want to be surprised by budget changes, and you don't want to have to keep asking stakeholders for more money. You can prevent that by revisiting these numbers on a regular basis. You'll also want to accept that budget misses will happen. It's your job to bring the expected cost overruns within acceptable limits. Before the project starts, collaborate with the project sponsors and key stakeholders to determine an acceptable limit. Is it 1%? 10%? You'll decide together. In a previous video, we talked briefly about what happens when a project goes over or under budget. Having a project go over budget may mean that the company will have less funds for other areas within the business. So let's dig a little deeper into the effects on a company when a project goes under budget. Even though it seems like going under budget would be a project manager's dream, it actually isn't. If you go under budget, it's an indicator of less than satisfactory project management. Going under budget indicates that you may not have done a good job at initially estimating. Going under budget could also indicate that you could have spent more money on the project, meaning that you could have possibly had extra resources or better quality output. And it may mean that the budget for future projects will be slashed. The company may figure that since you did this project under budget, you'll be able to do future projects under budget too. So that's not a totally desirable situation to be in either. The best option is to adequately account for, adapt, and manage your budget with that risk in mind. Later on, we'll cover other strategies more in depth that you could use to save the company money and time. You'll also learn the ins and outs of identifying and managing risks a little later on in the course. In the next lesson, we'll learn about procurement. See you in a bit. In the past, we've compared project management to starting a new hobby. Let's say you're trying to take up painting. In order to paint, you'll need to purchase, or in other words, procure, paint supplies and materials. So, first, you ask yourself, what supplies will you need? What kind of paint will you start with? Do you want to try oil paint, watercolor, or acrylic? Will you paint on canvas, wood, or paper? You need to research these choices before you procure your materials. Once your research is done, you can start procuring materials, scheduling courses, watching tutorials, and voila, you're on your way to becoming the next Frida Kahlo. So, as you may have guessed by now, procurement means obtaining all of the materials, services, and supplies required to complete the project. You'll need to procure vendors as well. Vendors are individuals or businesses who provide essential goods and services. Therefore, think of vendor management as procurement for individuals or businesses. Vendor management covers the activities included in researching and sourcing vendors. Instead of materials, vendor management is often a matter of sourcing for a specific service or talent and then managing that relationship. Sourcing talent includes researching and obtaining estimated costs from different partner companies you may use on a project. You'll typically use vendors when they provide specialized skills that aren't available within your company. Vendor management entails sourcing vendors, getting quotes for their work, deciphering which vendors will best fulfill your needs, negotiating their contracts, setting deadlines for them, evaluating performance, and ensuring payments are made. It also entails familiarizing yourself with regulations like the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you're working in the US, for example. And if you're somewhere else, being aware of similar regulations in that country. Keep in mind that not every project will require vendors or contractors, and so every project won't require vendor management. Let's revisit the example of contract workers in the context of Project Plant Pals at Office Green. Like many companies, Office Green doesn't have a copywriting department. So for the launch of Project Plant Pals, you'll need to use external resources to supply a contracted copywriter. This person is a necessary team member on the project because Office Green doesn't have copywriters or internal employee resources required to finish this task. This contractor, or team of contractors, will draft copy for the website for a slated amount of time, and then their work on this particular project will be complete. Awesome. Now that you know about procurement, in the next video, we'll discuss the different phases of the procurement process and how procurement differs depending on your approach to project management. See you then. While not every single project will require procurement, it's important to be prepared for it if and when procurement does come up. So, how do you get started? There are typically 5 steps that make up the procurement process. Let's go over them. First is initiating, which is the planning process of defining what help you may need outside of your current resources to hit the project goals. In this step, you'll also make a case for getting extra resources via the procurement process. Second is selecting, which entails deciding what supplies you need and which vendors you'll go through. The third step is contract writing, which is where the contracts are developed, reviewed, and signed. The fourth step is control, which is when you make payments, set up logistics and requirements to maintain quality, and ensure the service agreement is being met. The fifth and final step is completing, which is where you'll measure the success of the procurement. That's a quick overview of the procurement process. This high-level cycle of procurement will make more sense as we continue on through this course. One thing to note is the procurement process can seem a little different depending on the project management methodology. There are differences in procurement in the context of agile versus traditional. Agile procurement management is often more collaborative with both the project team and the end supplier than traditional approaches. There is a heavy emphasis on the relationship between these parties. The whole project team plays a larger role in identifying what needs to be procured. Rather than featuring contracts that are based on fixed deliverables, Agile procurement management tends to have a living contract that can be adapted based on the evaluation of the project. If you think of the word agility, which means to move easily and quickly, you'll be able to remember that Agile procurement can change more easily than traditional procurement methods. In this process, the team reviews the project or deliverables on a recurring basis and consistently addresses feedback. This way of working is important to communicate to your suppliers so they understand this style of working and agree to maintain flexibility. Again, it is so important to have a positive relationship with the procurement supplier. This is critical since the contract may need to be renegotiated at multiple points during the project. On the other hand, traditional procurement management tends to focus on standard contracts with clear terms and deliverables. When it comes to traditional approaches, the project manager may be responsible for end-to-end procurement instead of the entire team providing input. The contracts may feature lengthy and extensive documentation that include fixed requirements and comprehensive detail of the services and deliverables. While this may appear more rigid, the benefit is you've outlined clearer work streams and deadlines. This way, you're much more protected from unforeseen circumstances and may not have to pay for unpredictable changes. In traditional approaches, the negotiation process can be a little bit trickier. You won't necessarily have the room to renegotiate contracts if something changes, so you may have to start the whole process over again. That's why being as detailed as possible and spending more time in the negotiation phase is incredibly important in a more traditional project management approach. As you may have guessed, procurement can become pretty complex. But there are some official documents that can help guide you through the procurement process. In the next video, you'll learn more about those documents and processes. See you there. There are a few important documents that help a project manager navigate through each phase of procurement. For instance, in the initiating phase, a project manager will create a non-disclosure agreement, otherwise known as an NDA. In the selecting phase, a project manager creates a request for proposal, or an RFP. In the contracting phase, a statement of work, or an SOW, is created. Now let's learn more about these acronyms and documents. The first important document is a non-disclosure agreement, also known as an NDA. NDAs are standard within a lot of companies, and it's best practice to ask external contract workers to sign an NDA. The purpose of an NDA is to keep confidential information within the organization. So for instance, if a company is using some kind of proprietary technology on a project or preparing for a sensitive product launch, they want to ensure that any conversations or information surrounding that technology doesn't leak out to competitors or to the public before the company is ready to launch. For example, in Project Plant Pals, vendors might be required to sign an NDA because the project is new to market and hasn't been made public yet. Then we have a request for proposal, or an RFP, a document that outlines the details and requirements of an organization's project to be passed on to vendors. RFPs are used to solicit bids from vendors so that you can then select which vendor might be the best for your project. A RFP is widely used within different departments in a company and across various industries. An RFP typically includes an overview of the project, the desired outcomes and goals, budget, deadlines, milestones, and contact information, so each vendor can get back to you with a detailed proposal of how they plan to tackle the job. When creating an RFP, make sure to add the following headers to your document. The overview. Treat this section like a general summary. What is the purpose of this project? What problems will it solve? What new doors will it open for the company? Your goals. What are some measurable results you can aim to achieve throughout the process? Next is the scope of work. What are the specifics of the project? How are you going to achieve those goals and make sure the project launches successfully? Then include milestones. Make sure to highlight the key milestones your project will include. Lastly, include submission requirements, like please submit the RFP as a presentation and include 3 prototypes, as well as the questions you'd like the vendor to answer as part of the process. This helps you properly assess potential vendors. For instance, you might want to know what issues a contractor sees up front or how the costs will break down. After the RFP is sent out, various vendors will review it, and if they feel they can fulfill your project's needs, they'll provide a proposal. For example, you may create an RFP for Project Plant Pals to source plant providers. In this case, you'll want to send out RFPs to all possible plant providers to ensure that you're getting the best price, quality, and overall value. You may hear RFP being used as a verb, as in, has this been RFP'd yet? That's really a way of asking if an RFP has been sent out to vendors yet. It's important to note that both the NDA and the RFP are fixed and remain the same throughout the process. This means that there's not a lot of room for customization, and it won't be changed once it's submitted. Lastly, there's a third important document called a Statement of Work, or an SOW. An SOW is sent after the vendor is selected and evolves as the project goes on. We'll continue discussing these concepts and further explore the importance of a statement of work in the next video. I'll see you there. Let's continue learning about the necessary documents required for a successful project. After you've sent a request for proposal to clients and you've selected the vendor, client, or contractor you want to work with, you'll also send them an SOW, or a statement of work. A statement of work is a document that clearly lays out the products and services a vendor or contractor will provide for the organization. An SOW also provides a description of the contractor's needs and requirements to properly perform the agreed-upon services. Although the SOW covers the customer's needs, it's equally as important to include the organization's needs and the vendor's needs too. It's critical that all parties involved understand what is expected from each of them in order to deliver the best possible products or services. The project manager is tasked with developing the SOW, but often asks for input from subject matter experts, or SMEs, for technical expertise that the project manager may not have. Your organization's legal advisors will review this document with you and may even be crafting it alongside you. Let's discuss how to create an SOW in the example of Project Plant Pals. You'll want to start by including page headers with your company name, project, and creation date on them. At the top of the page, make sure to include important stakeholders like yourself as the project manager, and the name of the sponsor, which in this case is the director of product. Next, you'll construct a table for revisions. The SOW will likely go through a few rounds of revisions because several stakeholders may review it and suggest changes. You'll detail those changes in this box here. Next, you'll create a purpose section where you'll go into detail about exactly what the desired outcomes are. Make sure to include a section regarding your target audience and make sure it's inclusive of everyone. For instance, in this case, the purpose of the project is to launch a new service that provides desk plants to offices and commercial businesses. If you have more specific goals, you can list them here too. Next is the scope section, where you'll include what the service entails. You may write that the service includes providing customers with small, low-maintenance plants that they can place on their desks. Customers can order plants online or from a print catalogue. Office Green will ship the plants to the customer's work address. The types of plants in scope include 6-inch leafy ferns, small cacti, and 5-inch bonsai trees. Keeping this vendor in mind, some major activities may be storing the plants in a warehouse, maintaining the health of the plants by providing them with water and light, sourcing the vases and ensuring that the vases are in near perfect condition upon delivery. You will also want to mention what's out of scope, or, in other words, what the project doesn't include. This will eliminate any potential room for confusion and help set expectations with the vendor. For instance, you may write that the project doesn't include annual reporting or custom plant orders that are not mentioned in the scope. This helps draw clear lines and sets the right expectations with the vendor. For deliverables, you'll want a concise statement about what your project will deliver. For example, your Office Green project deliverables could include the vendor providing maintenance guides on how to take care of the plants, or that the vendor will be responsible for developing a support page on Office Green's website to address any questions or concerns. Since milestones are such an integral part of tracking progress, budget, and scope, they'll need to be included here too. Examples of milestones in Project Plant Pals could be to fulfill the first quarter of plant orders, deliver to all of the top customers, launch customer satisfaction surveys, collect and report on any insights from customer feedback. You'll want to make it really clear on how many hours are needed for the completion of this project here. And you will want to designate a particular date that you need their services performed by here. At the bottom, you'll typically add terms and conditions and any other disclaimers. It's good to have a disclaimer stating that revisions may take place as the project goes on. This is important to include, just in case the scope changes because of unforeseen issues. It's a good idea to add revisions into the disclaimer because, as a project manager, it's best not to overpromise and underdeliver. You always want to be clear that you intend to stick to the schedule unless circumstances outside of your control intervene. Another part of your SOW is payment terms. This outlines when your suppliers need to be paid. Ensuring that suppliers are paid on time will promote strong relationships. Generally, good procurement practice would be to pay your vendors and contractors upon delivery of goods and service, not before, unless a circumstantial agreement has been made. For instance, if Office Green's plant provider requested to be paid when each milestone was completed instead of after the entire project is finished. Great job! Now you know more about SOWs. Next up, we'll discuss the importance of partnering with your legal team during the procurement process. See you there. Now that you have a better understanding about NDAs, RFPs, and SOWs, let's discuss how you can get support from other departments and team members as procurement goes forward. The procurement process doesn't end after you've selected vendors and signed contracts. You'll use performance trackers and meetings like quarterly business reviews to track and evaluate overall performance to ensure that both parties are living up to their initial agreement. And when there are contracts and paperwork with terminology that you may not be familiar with, you'll enlist the help of a legal team. Depending on the company's size, the legal situation may vary. Some companies, usually well-established and larger businesses, will have a legal team. Some businesses may outsource their legal team. Some startups or smaller companies may not have a legal team, but they might reach out to legal advisors as needed. Again, this all depends on the company where you work. Laws surrounding manufacturing products and consumerism will vary from country to country. But there will nearly always be laws in place that you'll need to follow around topics like fair and ethical trade. Most companies have a mission or value statement. Sometimes, a team of people in the ethics and compliance departments are tasked with ensuring that the day-to-day operations are adhering to their value statement and governmental policies. These team members will also be tasked with duties like working to prevent discrimination and making sure that the company is practicing adequate corporate social responsibility. Also, as a project manager, you'll need to ensure that the various stakeholders who are representing the business are adhering to these policies and processes too. You'll all need to be aware of any pertinent meetings regarding legal or compliance issues, and you, as a project manager, will have to remind the team about when those meetings are being held. Looping in the appropriate stakeholders is especially critical if there's some kind of necessary approval, since it'll have an impact on the project one way or another. Like most projects, for Project Plant Pals, looping in legal and compliance for review and approvals is really important. For instance, let's say some of the offices where you're delivering plants are pet-friendly. In your contract with the supplier, you've specified that you want to offer non-toxic plants only. Unfortunately, the supplier provided a plant with leaves that are harmful to animals. Office Green could potentially be liable and in legal trouble because this critical detail was missed. Pretty crucial consideration, right? So, regardless of your future company's legal team or advisory, having contracts reviewed in some capacity make good business sense and should be a priority for you as a project manager. Now you're on your way to becoming your own lawyer. Only kidding. But you hopefully have a better grasp of the importance of your legal team and having them review your contracts. Next up, we'll discuss the importance of checking in with your vendors. And we'll find out what compliance has to do with the procurement process. I'll see you soon. Welcome back. We've learned a bit about the ins and outs of contracting with vendors. So let's learn more about the importance of ethics when partnering with vendors. Failing to be mindful when choosing vendors can lead to significant consequences. If you've seen a company in the news that's been entangled in a scandal, that usually means that the team probably should have done more research in the procurement process. So, what does that entail? There's a lot that can be done to ensure that businesses are operating in an ethical way. Project managers have a big job when deciphering whether or not every aspect of their project is sourced ethically. It helps if the project manager thoroughly oversees the project to make sure the safety, economic, and environmental ethical risks are mitigated. In other words, doing a lot of research, monitoring, and evaluating throughout the project is a project manager's job. There are a couple of steps to safeguard ethical procurement. The first is knowing your business's legal requirements. You'll want to have a deep understanding of what is required of you legally as a project manager for your business. You can also seek out the code of ethics for your profession, which in this case is for project managers. For instance, the Project Management Institute, also known as PMI, has a code of ethics that you can access as a member or credential holder. This will help you understand some parameters for how to assess ethical versus unethical procurement. According to the PMI's code of ethics, honesty, responsibility, respect, and fairness are the values that drive ethical conduct for the project management profession. So, when you become a project manager, if you aren't totally sure if something is ethical, first, try to use your best judgment based on what you believe those words mean, and continue to do the required research. If you still aren't sure, don't hesitate to ask a subject matter expert, such as someone from the legal team. As a starting point, some unethical issues or risks you may run into may include bribery or corruption. Some regulations in other countries may not be the same as regulations in your country. So, for example, you'll want to make sure laborers involved in production are treated fairly, working in good conditions, and are compensated adequately for their work. It is a good idea to consult your legal team to ensure that you don't run into these situations and to be aware of the regulations surrounding your processes. You'll also want to be aware of possible issues with sole supplier sourcing. In some scenarios, you may need to perform non-competitive procurement, which is when a company restricts the bidding process to one supplier. This may be common for companies who are more cautious about exposing trade secrets. But, regardless of your reasoning, you'll need to be able to justify exactly why you are choosing to restrict bidding to one supplier. There's also interaction with state-owned entities. You'll want to be vigilant when dealing with government agencies and officials. Government agencies may have tighter restrictions and regulations in regard to sourcing, and you don't want to do anything unethical without even knowing it. A project manager monitors the project's ethics throughout the whole process. In the initiating phase, you'll need to decide whether the project is ethical in the first place. Does it meet your business's code of ethics? Does the project meet environmental ethics laid out by governmental agencies? Is the labor going to be ethically sourced? You'll need to review government regulations and policies, assess potential risks, and put together a diverse team that you trust to be ethical. Before the contracts are signed, you'll want to figure out whether the suppliers you're thinking of hiring are ethical. You'll want to make sure that you're procuring them in an ethical way and are paying them a fair rate. And you'll also want to completely understand the supply chain, if there is one. After the contracts have been signed by your contractors, make sure to carry out your assurance duties. This may include things like auditing each task and cost, executing quality control, or even approving invoices. During the production of your service or product, Focus on the day-to-day relationships with vendors to make sure they're aware of and meeting your deliverables and keeping you informed of any potential roadblocks. After you've done all the research that you possibly can on whether your project is ethical, remember to trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. As you know, there's a lot to keep track of as a project manager. By keeping these ethical principles in mind as you begin your project, you'll save yourself and the company from a lot of headaches later on. Of course, you can usually go to your legal team or key stakeholders if you ever have a question or need a second opinion. In the next video, we're going to review and wrap up everything we've just covered. I'll see you there. Wow, we really covered a lot here. We learned all about managing costs and budget. We learned that a project budget is the estimated monetary resources needed to achieve outlined goals and objectives. We learned that a project budget is much more nuanced than just aiming to save money. It's a success metric that's used to track project performance. And remember, it's not desirable to be over budget or under budget. We also learned that cost control involves several stakeholders, sign-off from key stakeholders, and actively managing changes. And we definitely went in-depth on procurement and vendor management, which involves obtaining the necessary supplies, materials, and external resources for your project's success. We learned the important steps initiating, selecting, contract writing, control, and completing. We now know that procurement will be different depending on which methodology you're using. An agile procurement approach differs from a traditional procurement approach. It's more relationship-based because the negotiation stays open the whole time. An agile procurement requires more frequent communication with vendors because the contracts may be reviewed and adjusted regularly. The traditional approach is typically done during the procurement stage and ends there. We learned about NDAs, RFPs, and SOWs, and we created an SOW together. Finally, you learned a bit about how to think critically when it comes to ethics in procurement. You learned how to adhere to a code of ethics, when to use your own judgment, and the importance of researching the ethics of procurement. Nice job. Next up, you're going to learn about different types of risks, how to identify risk, and how to mitigate risk. See you there. Welcome back. Earlier, we covered managing costs and a project budget. We discussed what the components of a project budget are, how the budget process works, and how to track and estimate a budget. You also learned about the procurement process. Coming up, we will discuss risk management and why it's important to help prevent project failure. Knowing how to anticipate and alleviate, commonly known as mitigate, the potential problems is your best bet for keeping a project on track. You will learn how to define and relate risk management concepts and explain how risk management can help protect your project from failing. You'll also identify risk types and how to measure their impact on a project and communicate and resolve identified risks using a mitigation plan. Ready to get started? Great. Meet me in the next video. Think about a time in your life when you managed a project. Maybe it was a professional project, like creating an employee schedule, or a personal project, like planning a family celebration. Now ask yourself this: did everything go according to plan? If I had to guess, I would bet there was at least one hurdle you had to deal with. That's because no project goes 100% according to plan, even when they are run by the most experienced project managers. Maybe you planned that employee schedule perfectly, and then someone caught a cold, forcing you to rearrange the schedule at the last minute. Or maybe just as family members started arriving for that celebration, you realized you forgot to buy ice to keep the drinks cold. And hey, these things happen. As we told you earlier, flexibility is an important skill for managing projects. Due to the nature of the project, and really life in general, it's also important that you identify and plan for risks that could impact your project. Let's discuss what a risk actually is. A risk is a potential event which can occur and can impact your project. When you think about risk in the context of project management, you'll think about them as hypothetical. In other words, these aren't events that will definitely happen, but because there's a possibility that they could happen, it's your responsibility as the project manager to identify and plan for those risks. Next, let's discuss issues. An issue is a known or real problem that can affect the ability to complete a task. So, what's the difference between a risk and an issue? Think of it like this. A risk is an event that could potentially happen. If the event actually happens, then the risk becomes an issue. In other words, risks are the big what-ifs, and issues are things that currently impact a project. It is clear that risks and issues can pose a threat to your project. How you manage those risks is known as risk management. Risk management is the process of identifying and evaluating potential risks and issues that could impact a project. It's not a one-time exercise. It's something that you'll need to do regularly to address potential risks. Risk management is a crucial part of the planning process by giving you an understanding of what could go wrong with your project. It also tells you who you need to consult about the risk. It helps you determine how the potential risk could be mitigated. This way, if or when something goes wrong, you'll have a plan prepared and ready to go. Part of being proactive and planning ahead is identifying potential risks and how to solve for them. This way, you'll set up your project with better chances for success. Failing to engage in meaningful risk management can have a few big consequences for your project. First, if you don't plan ahead, you may put your project at risk of not meeting its project goal, its timelines, or its success criteria. For example, if your goal is to publish a research report and your research analyst quits halfway through the project, you'll likely miss the deadline if you don't have a backup plan ready to go. Additionally, by failing to plan for risks, you also fail to think through the many different ways that your project could pivot and still meet its goals, even if an issue does arise. There often isn't just one way to meet your project goals, and success can come in many forms. Risk management helps you determine how flexible or rigid your plan is, and then make necessary adjustments. For example, if your project requires a large product shipment, having a backup supplier ready means you could quickly pivot if our main supplier is unable to fulfill your order. Finally, risks can affect projects in a variety of ways that are difficult to foresee. For example, a supplier you've hired may not have adequate stock to cover your purchasing needs, or the budget for your project could be cut unexpectedly. The risk management process helps reduce the impact of unexpected events, freeing up resources to focus on activities that benefit the project. Let's imagine risk management in the context of Plant Pals at Office Green, which is a new service that will provide customers with small, low-maintenance desk plants. One potential project risk is the possibility that the web page for the new service won't be live in time for the launch. Another potential risk could be a fulfillment shortage. What would you do if the plant supplier runs low on the cacti and ferns that you need? To prepare for these potential risks, you will need to think about ways to mitigate these issues before they happen, or how you will address these issues if they actually occur. Hopefully, these things won't be a problem, but if they are, you'll be prepared. I also want to stress that issues will come up throughout the project you did not or could not have planned for. And that's okay. When these moments arise, it is important to keep calm, figure out the root cause of the problem, and come up with a solution. Risk management is a really important topic for project managers to understand. Identifying risks and issues prepares you for the unknown. It also positively impacts you as the project manager because you'll feel more prepared, less stressed, and more confident in your approach if an issue does occur. Up next, we will discuss ways that you can identify risks. I'll meet you there.
Hi, I'm Stanton, and I'm a program manager at YouTube. Thinking back to one of the first projects I ever worked on, we were actually in charge of building this sports highlight app. But it wasn't just an app, it was an iOS app, it was an Android app, it was a website. And I remember the very first meeting I went to, I was just furiously taking down notes and trying to understand what the heck was going on. And immediately after, I thought, okay, this is my first project. I have to get all the details right. I have to make sure we know every little thing that was going to happen. The launch date needed to be perfect. We had to get all the bugs down to zero. I was just totally consumed with getting everything right the first time. I think what I've realized since then is you're probably not going to get your first project plan correct because there's just so many things that can change. You might find a bug last minute before launch. Your client might come in and say they want a different requirement, like the screen needs to be blue instead of red, and then you find out that it's not really that easy to change from blue to red. If I could go back and tell myself what to do at that point or what I could have done differently, I would have just told myself, don't worry so much. Changes happen. It's how you react and respond to those changes that's more important. I think one of the best compliments I've gotten is, even throughout all this mess, you're cool, you're calm, and you're collected. You think through what are the issues that have happened, how do we resolve them, and you do your program management thing. You're not always going to have the right answer the very first time. Things can change at the last minute. If you're able to stay cool and calm, make sure you understand everything else that's going on the project. All these years have taught me that you can always reuse some things. You're always going to have to react to some things, but no matter what, try to think proactively, try to figure out what those issues are going to be, and you'll be the better for it.
Hello, and welcome back. Hopefully you're beginning to notice how important it is to plan for risks. Even the simplest projects can carry some kind of risks. Remember, those risks shouldn't deter you from pursuing the project's goals. The key is to be prepared. Let's discuss tools and techniques you can use to identify risks, including brainstorming and risk assessment. Brainstorming is one of the most effective techniques for identifying risks with a team because it allows groups to spontaneously share ideas without judgment. As a project manager, you will be responsible for bringing a group of people together to imagine potential risks. Have your RACI chart at the ready to refer to when you decide who to invite to this meeting. Speaking from experience, the best team for this task is a diverse one, which includes individuals from various roles, backgrounds, and experiences. Diverse teams bring different perspectives, experiences, and skill sets, and this may help you to identify risks that you may not have thought of on your own. For example, one member of your team might have experience working on multiple projects, while another newer team member might bring a fresh perspective from their previous experience on other teams. A great tool that you can use during brainstorming is called a cause and effect diagram, also sometimes known as a fishbone diagram. Cause and effect diagrams show the possible causes of an event or risk and are very useful at risk management. For example, in the diagram seen here, the effect listed is a supplier missing its deadlines. This is a risk to your project. On the left, you'll brainstorm potential causes that would lead to the effect, like poor delegation or a lack of tracking tools. In other words, cause and effect diagrams can help identify all the ways that things could go wrong by identifying a potential risk, known as the effect, and working backwards to consider the potential causes of that risk. By categorizing and breaking them down into further causes, you are able to identify areas that could lead to a potential problem, like exceeding your budget or allowing scope creep to impact your timeline. As a reminder, scope creep refers to changes, growth, and uncontrolled factors that affect a project's scope at any point after the project begins. During these brainstorming sessions, you might find that your list of potential risks is quite long, and that's okay. It is a reality. You and your team cannot account for every single problem that can occur during your project. So how do you decide which risks to focus on? List the outcomes from the brainstorm in a risk register. A risk register is a table or chart that contains your list of risks. Next, you'll adopt a risk assessment technique. Risk assessment is the stage of risk management where qualities of a risk are estimated or measured. By qualities, we're mainly referring to how likely the risk is to occur and its potential impact on a project. We'll come back to this point in a moment. There are a few ways to assess risks, but one we'll focus on is creating a probability and impact matrix. A probability and impact matrix is a tool used to prioritize project risks. I personally love this technique and use it all the time in my role at Google. Earlier I mentioned that you'll need to assess the likelihood that a risk will happen and its potential impact. This matrix will help you do just that. To create a probability and impact matrix, you'll need to think about the level of impact. Impact refers to the damage a risk could cause if it occurs. Impact is also determined on a scale of high, medium, and low. High means that if the risk occurs, it will substantially alter the project. Low means if the risk occurs, it will have a slight impact, but it's not likely to derail the project. You'll also need to think about probability. Probability is the likelihood that a risk will occur. We also determine probability on a scale of high, medium, and low. In this case, high probability means there's a high likelihood of this happening. Low probability means you've identified a risk that could happen, but it isn't likely that the risk will occur. These two considerations come together to determine the inherent risk rating. Inherent risk is the measure of a risk calculated by its probability and impact. Measuring the inherent risk gives us a method for understanding a risk. Inherent risk is also determined on a high, medium, and low scale. So, basically, if a risk has a low impact and a low probability, it has a low inherent risk rating. These are the types of risks you don't need to worry too much about. But if a risk has a high impact and a high probability, then it carries a high inherent risk rating. Medium to high risks are the risks you should focus on and create detailed mitigation plans for. When you're creating a probability and impact matrix, it's important to ensure you create a matrix that meets accessibility guidelines and has information and formatting that everyone can easily and quickly understand. One way to do this is to use both color and distinct shapes or text to communicate levels of risk. You can learn more about accessibility communication by visiting course resources. The way you view and manage each risk will be determined based on your organization's risk appetite, which refers to the willingness of an organization to accept the possible outcomes of a risk. You, your team, and your stakeholders may have different appetites for each risk. We'll discuss how risk appetite plays into risk mitigation in just a bit. Certain low-level risks that could result in minor setbacks are much more tolerable than high-level risks that have the potential to completely derail your project. Once you've completed your risk assessment, you'll update the risk register to include high, medium, and low ratings for some examples of risks that you've identified for this project. Great. Now that we've covered how to identify and assess risks, we'll go on to the next video, where we'll discuss some of the types of risks you'll run into during your role as a project manager. Meet you there. Hi again. Let's discuss some common types of risks that you might plan for while managing a project. Though there are many different types of risks that could impact your project, the big ones that you want to be aware of are time risks, budget risks, and scope risks. Let's break those down. First, we have time risks. Time risk refers to the possibility that project tasks will take longer than anticipated to complete. You'll need to be aware of time risks because time is money. Poor time management may deplete your budget and upset your stakeholders by causing delays. Next, we have budget risk. Budget risk refers to the possibility that the cost of a project will increase due to poor planning or expanding the project's scope. You need to be aware of budget risk since budgeting provides the basis for project costs control. For example, if you overspend, you might not be able to pay your suppliers. This could also result in some reputational damage for the company. Then we have scope risk. Scope risk refers to the possibility that a project won't produce the results outlined in the project goals. You need to be aware of scope risks because the deliverables of your project might not be acceptable to your stakeholders or customers, and that may defeat the purpose of the entire project. While time, budget, and scope risks are very common, there are other types of external risks that you should be aware of. By external risks, we're referring to risks that result from factors outside of the company that you have little to no control over. For example, your project could be impacted by an environmental risk, like a major storm, or a legal risk, like a change in regulatory requirements. And it's also important to know that there are endless types of risks. There will never be a prescription for how to identify and manage every single possible risk. But if you have a plan, you'll be better set up to deal with whatever comes your way. Okay, now let's discuss a certain type of risk known as a single point of failure. A single point of failure is a risk that has the potential to be catastrophic and halt work across a project. These are risks that have the power to stop an entire team in its tracks, meaning that no one can make progress on their tasks until the issue is resolved. For example, in our Office Green scenario, a single point of failure might be a power outage that takes down the internal database where every piece of information about the project is stored. Until the database is back up and running, your team won't have access to any of the information they need to do their jobs. As a result, your team won't be able to complete any of their assigned tasks. To mitigate this risk, you might budget for a separate cloud service to serve as your backup for all of your project documentation and information. As the project manager, you'll need to identify and monitor potential single points of failure in your project, since they can be detrimental to the project timeline, budget, and scope. Another source of risk to be aware of are dependencies. A dependency is a relationship between two project tasks, where the start or completion of one depends on the start or completion of the other. In other words, dependencies are like links that connect one project task to another. A dependency must be addressed before the task can be completed or before another task can begin. Because dependencies are the links that connect one project task to another, they are often a huge source of risk to a project. For example, imagine that you've tasked a teammate with hiring a local plant supplier. Until they've signed a contract with the supplier, your team can't place any orders. That's a dependency. Now here's where the risk comes in. If your teammate doesn't meet the hiring deadline and then goes on vacation for a week, this could delay your project timeline. Not great, right? If you don't plan for dependencies, you might risk an impact to your budget, schedule, or project outcome. To prevent something like this from happening, you might ask a teammate to share their out-of-office plans with you at the start of the project. This helps you to stay aware of everyone's schedules, ensuring that there are backup plans in place to maintain your project schedule. There are two types of dependencies, internal and external. Internal dependencies refer to dependencies within the project that you and your team have control over. For example, you'll need to secure approval on a website design before development can begin. On the other hand, external dependencies are dependencies that you have no control over. For example, the farm that your plant vendor works at might have experienced a lighter rain season this year, meaning that they'll have fewer plants to sell. There are many different risks that can impact your project, from time risks to budget risks to scope risks. But remember, no project is risk-free. And with careful upfront planning, you can do your best to prevent risks from occurring. In the next video, we'll discuss how to mitigate risks. I'll meet you there. Hi, and welcome back. Okay, so you've learned how to identify your project's risks and assess them using a probability and impact matrix. Now that you know which risks require your attention, how do you determine what to do about them? This is where risk mitigation planning comes in. Risk mitigation planning is about finding ways to eliminate or reduce the impact of potential risks to your project. There are 4 common ways to mitigate risk. You can avoid it, accept it, reduce or control it, or transfer it. Let's discuss each option using the office screen example. Sometimes you can avoid the risk altogether. For example, if you learn that a certain contractor you've considered working with on your office screen project has a poor reputation for meeting deadlines, then you might choose to avoid that risk by hiring a different contractor. You can also accept the risk, especially ones that you deem low in probability and impact. In this case, you're accepting the possibility that this risk can happen. You've agreed to monitor it throughout the project, and you'll ultimately be okay with the risk if it does happen. For instance, maybe your plant supplier tells you that one of the planter styles you've requested is backordered. The supplier is confident that they'll have time to restock the planters without delaying your project schedule. But if there is an issue with their restock shipment, this could delay deliveries to your clients by up to 2 days. Rather than starting over with a new supplier, you decide that it makes more sense to accept the risk. It wouldn't be ideal for this delay to occur, but you're flexible and you know that accepting this risk will save you and your team the headache of onboarding a new supplier, which could take 2 weeks. Another way to mitigate a risk is to reduce or control it. Personally, I like to use a decision tree when building mitigation plans. A decision tree is a flowchart that helps visualize the wider impact of a decision on the rest of your project. For example, you decide to hire the contractor with a reputation for missing deadlines because you know they do great work. In this case, you might create a quick flowchart that visualizes the risks and potential options for addressing it, like checking in with the contractor daily, either by email or through meetings. Ultimately, you might then choose to have daily check-in meetings with the team to ensure that they're staying on top of their tasks. Finally, you can choose to transfer the risk. For example, you've determined that it's too risky to attempt to grow plants on site at Office Green due to the possibility that bad weather or pests could negatively impact your product. Instead, you've made a decision to transfer the risk to another party or parties. By outsourcing plant production to local suppliers, you have the power to change supplies if there's an issue with quality. When you transfer the risk, you don't risk losing out on time, resources, and money. So to recap, 4 common ways to mitigate a risk are to avoid it, accept it, reduce or control it, or transfer it. Using one of these 4 strategies can help you effectively take control of the risks to your project. Coming up, we'll discuss how to document these risks in a risk management plan. Now that you know your options for mitigating potential risks, let's discuss how to document your risk planning decisions. As you've been learning throughout this program, documentation is a crucial part of your role as a project manager. This is especially true when identifying risks and creating a plan to mitigate them. A risk management plan is a living document that contains information regarding high-level risks and the mitigation plan for each of those risks. This plan helps ensure that teammates and stakeholders have a clear understanding of potential problems and a plan to address them should they occur. Risk management is an ongoing practice that you'll take part in throughout the planning and execution of a project. Since risk management evolves throughout the project, the plan should be updated regularly to add newly identified risks, remove risks that are no longer relevant, and include any changes in the mitigation plans. Let's review an example of a risk management plan, similar to the one we sometimes use here at Google. At the top of the document, we include the name of the company, and below it, the name of the project. We also include the document author so that anyone reviewing the plan knows exactly who to reach out to if they have any questions. This template also designates a spot for the document status. As you're building your plan, you can list the status as in progress. Once the plan is complete, you can change the status to final. We've also included helpful details like when the document was created and when it was last updated. Details like these might seem small, but it's best practice to include them. That's because being transparent about dates provides stakeholders with a sense of how up to date the document is. Below these details, we have the document objective. Here, we've written that our objective is to outline mitigation plans for Project Plant POWs. Below that, we've added an executive summary of our project. Executive summaries should include a brief introduction to the normal conditions of a project and an outline of the potential risks that could impact the project. Now onto the really important stuff, the risks and how we'll mitigate them. This document also includes the risk register you learned about earlier, which is a table or a chart that contains your list of possible risks. Here, we've outlined one of the potential risks to Project Plant POWs, which is the potential for the vendor to fall behind on a deadline. We've given this risk a medium inherent risk rating. Remember that inherent risk is the measure of a risk calculated by its probability and impact. A mitigation plan has also been included for this risk, which is to hold daily meetings with the vendor to help them stay on task. Down in the appendix of the document, you'll find the probability and impact charts, as well as the probability and impact matrix that we use to assess our risks. Once you've filled out the risk management plan, you'll share it with your team and stakeholders to get their input and to ensure that they are aligned with your plans. Coming up, we'll dig deeper into the topic of communicating risks to stakeholders. See you there. Hello. As you've learned in the past few videos, identifying and assessing risks is a crucial part of the project planning process. These exercises help clarify the most important risks for you and your team and ensure that everyone agrees on which risks to plan for. But it's not enough for you and your teammates to simply be aware of the biggest risks to a project. You also need to communicate these risks to your project stakeholders, whether through documentation, email, meetings, or other forms of communication you've deemed appropriate. Your stakeholders need to be aware of the risks facing a project, because if you don't tell your stakeholders about important risks, they may be less equipped to help you if an issue does arise. For example, they might not be able to provide you with more budget should you need it, or with more resources should you require them. Even worse, your stakeholder might be caught off guard by an issue. Unpleasant surprises like these can erode their trust in you as a leader of the project. They'll likely want to know if you were aware of the possibility that this risk could occur, and they might wonder why you didn't share this information with them sooner. That's why it's important to communicate early and often with stakeholders about medium and high-level risks. It sets expectations with stakeholders about what to potentially expect during the project execution phase, and demonstrates that you've taken steps to mitigate and plan for those risks should they come up. It also gives you the opportunity to suggest ways they might be able to help you if a risk does arise. So how do you communicate risks to stakeholders during the planning phase? Well, that depends on the severity of the identified risk. For low-level risks, something as simple as an email might suffice. For example, when sending out weekly planning updates to a project stakeholder, you might list a few low-level risks that are relevant to their interests, and briefly explain how you'll address these risks if they arise. For medium-level risks, you might increase your level of communication to a direct email between yourself and the stakeholder, in which you outline the risk with more specifics and provide a detailed explanation of your plan to mitigate the risk. You might also link to your risk management plan to provide them with more information. And you might write urgent in the subject line to stress the email's importance. The serious nature of high-level risks requires a thorough and direct level of communication. When you're meeting with stakeholders to go over the project plan, you might add an agenda item to present serious risks and your plans to mitigate these risks. You can also use this time to collect feedback on your risk management plan and ask for insights from stakeholders on how they suggest handling these high-level risks. Your stakeholders might have prior experience planning for similar risks and strategies that you hadn't considered before. Risk communication is a big part of my role here at Google. As a program manager, I am constantly writing emails and delivering presentations on the status of my projects, often with the goal of sharing known risks and my risk mitigation plans. And in discussing these plans with my stakeholders, we often uncover other risks that I hadn't even considered. For example, in a recent meeting, I was presenting a potential new product to a stakeholder on a different team. In the meeting, the stakeholder flagged their concerns that my solution might create time and resource risks that could have a negative impact on their team. This discussion gave me deeper insights of my colleagues' potential risks and of the product's users' needs, which made me realize that I needed to ask my project sponsors for additional budget and resources. So it's always a good idea to discuss your plans with your stakeholders. They may have a different perspective. So to recap, it's important to communicate risks to stakeholders so that they're better able to help you should one arise. And you should tailor your communication style according to the severity of the risk. Up next, we'll review and wrap up all that we've covered. Meet me there.
My name is Aji, and I'm a senior program manager at Google. Program management spans a lot of different industries, a lot of different applications. At its core, it means that we bring order to chaos. So at Google, for me, I work on product launches. I also develop new processes and procedures for teams. So I work across different functional areas. So that could be engineering, could be UX, it could even be people ops to help launch products. To me, risk management means looking ahead and trying to anticipate issues. So I liken it to the analogy of, being on a ship and being the person looking ahead to make sure there's no rocks, right? A lot of our projects, I would say for the most part, at least in my experience, are never just done in a silo. Like there are other dependencies, right? And other teams that are depending on you to execute. So it's very important to de-risk, to look ahead, to manage those risks, to communicate those risks to the appropriate stakeholders, to make sure that you're delivering on your commitments. I think that's the first step, is identifying the problems, bringing in the right people so that you know that you have a good kind of comprehensive list. And then from there, trying to figure out how to manage those issues. And again, that should be a very collaborative thing, right? Because everybody on your team needs to be equally vested in making sure that the project executes successfully. So I have a project right now that I'm working on. And with this project, after we determined what our strategy was going to be and what our end state was going to be from a product strategy perspective, the next step was creating what we call UX mocks or UX designs. And so basically that's just pictures of what we want our end state to be. Like what's our ideal state, right? In a visual format. As a program manager, my job is to kind of take a step back and make sure, okay, what are the potential landmines, right? Like what could go wrong? As I started going through the designs and looking at them, I realized that in my mind, it was hard for me to kind of reconcile and say, okay, this is what we're doing today, this is what's going to change. It wasn't very clear to me. And I'm less of a visual person and more of like I like spreadsheets and all of that and have, things in detail. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, if I'm having this issue trying to reconcile between, okay, visually, we say we're going to design this, but this is where we are, like, what's the difference? If I'm having this issue, then maybe other people are having this issue as well. And okay, if other people are having this issue, maybe our engineers are having this issue as well. And so, when I set up the meeting, within 5 minutes, we started to realize that there were differences in how they were interpreting what we were supposed to do. So we had gone down this road where these two teams were executing on things in different way. We wouldn't have realized it into the end, and then it would have been too late. I love program management. I love coming into a problem, being given a problem that's very ambiguous and not well thought through, right? And it's a huge pain point, and then coming up with a solution to that problem.
Nice work. Let's recap what we've discussed so far. You learned about risks, which are potential events that could impact your project. You also learned how risks differ from issues, which are known and real problems that may affect the ability to complete a certain task. And I introduced you to risk management, which is the process of identifying potential risks and issues that could impact a project, and evaluating and applying steps to address their effects. We've discussed brainstorming as a technique for identifying risks, and I introduced you to tools you can use to identify, assess, and document risks, like a probability and impact matrix, a risk register, and a risk management plan. And finally, we discussed the importance of communicating risks to your stakeholders in order to set expectations and demonstrate your work to plan for and mitigate potential problems with the project. Coming up, we'll discuss documentation and communication. See you soon. Welcome back. We're in the last section of this course on planning, and it's finally time to tie together everything you've been working on. So far, we've covered the key components of the planning stage: how to set a schedule, create and manage a budget, and how to identify and manage risks. Up next, I'll discuss the importance of project communication plans. There are many ways to effectively communicate during the planning phase and beyond. Here, I'll teach you some great communication strategies, and I'll show you how to create a successful communication plan for any project. Let's get started. Communication is very important to every project. I'd even argue that it's the most important tool in making sure your project runs smoothly. Many times, what contributes to the success or failure of a project team comes down to whether or not everyone understands what's happening and how their tasks contribute to the project's goals. As project manager, you play a big part in making sure everyone knows what their roles and tasks are. You're also the person that team members come to when they're just in need of a quick answer, so being able to communicate clearly and effectively is key. It's important to remember that without effective communication, the project is at risk of missing important opportunities or even failing altogether. During a project I recently worked on, my stakeholders allocated a few design specialists to work with me. In the first week of the project, I noticed that one specialist wasn't attending any of the project meetings. I decided to approach the individual about their absence. When asked, they stated that they were well over capacity with the current workload and were unable to commit to the short deadlines I had been assigning. There were a couple of breakdowns in communication here. First, between the specialist and their manager. And second, between the specialist and me, the project manager. Ideally, the specialist and their manager would have communicated better with each other about the specialist's ability to take on the workload. If I had not communicated with the specialist, their continued absence at meetings could have resulted in lots of lost time, the project being delayed, or not being able to deliver the project in a satisfactory way. As it turned out, we only ended up losing a week of work due to the lack of communication. However, since I followed up quickly, we were able to pivot and assign another specialist to the project. So we know communication is very important. But what is communication exactly? To put it simply, communication is the flow of information. It includes everything that's shared, how it's shared, and with whom. Good, effective communication is always clear, honest, relevant, and frequent. But not too frequent. There is such a thing as information overload. Effective communication makes it possible for your project to run on time and up to the expectations outlined in the project plan. So take full advantage of tools like meetings, emails, phone calls, written documents, and formal presentations, and make sure they are accessible by everyone. It's also important to remember that communication is not a one-time event or a one-way route. It needs to happen throughout the entire life cycle of the project, from the project team and stakeholders, as well as from you. So be sure to clarify goals and client expectations, follow up on action items, and communicate delays as the project progresses. This will help you avoid issues and setbacks. As the project manager, you're responsible for creating a consistent flow of communication throughout the project. Setting the tone for team communication and working to make sure everyone's on the same page every step of the way gives your project the best chance to succeed. Okay, hopefully it's clear that communication is incredibly important to manage a project. Coming up, I'll show you how to make a communication plan that will help you manage all important communication. See you in a bit. So far, you've learned some common ways of communicating during a project. Let's take that a step further by learning how to create a communication plan that will help you manage all the different kinds of communication that will happen during a project. Trust me, there's going to be a lot of communication, so you'll need a plan to help you stay aware of it all and to use as a tool for communicating effectively. A communication plan organizes and documents the process, types, and expectations of communication for the project. The size and complexity of your communication plan will be different for every project, but it is always good to have one, especially when multiple stakeholders, different phases, and change management are involved. It will really help you, your project, and the stakeholders. Just like other plans related to the project, your communication plan needs to address these questions. What needs to be communicated? Who needs to communicate? When communication needs to happen? Why and how to communicate? And where the information communicated is stored. Let's break down each question with a sample communication plan that I've created for our Plant Pals project. First off, your communication plan should include what you're communicating on, or in other words, the type of communication. This could include things like status updates, issues, feedback from users, daily check-ins, and other types of project meetings. Then, you need to identify who you'll communicate with. These are the recipients of the information, like key stakeholders and the core project team. For each type of communication, record when to communicate. This includes the frequency, which is how often you'll communicate, and key dates like deadlines or major meetings. One thing to keep in mind is that not everyone needs to receive the same amount of information at the same time. Generally speaking, your key stakeholders will get their information less often, like in a monthly high-level summary email or project review meeting. But your core project team could receive more detailed info through daily email updates or quick virtual check-ins. Next, include how you'll communicate or what delivery method you'll use. This could be email, in-person or virtual meetings, or a formal presentation. Your plan also needs to include the goal of communicating. This is your why. So ask yourself, why are you communicating? Is it to give a progress update, identify a risk and address barriers? Or perhaps you need to figure out next steps, detail preparation plans, and reflect on lessons learned. The goal of communication could be a combination of any of these, or some other reason altogether. In either case, there must be a purpose for communicating, otherwise you risk wasting valuable time. Finally, include where communication resources are located, along with any other notes. I'll talk more about best practices for storing information in the next video, but for now, try to remember that relevant information should be easily accessible so that you, your stakeholders, and your team can quickly find the resources they need to make decisions, work on tasks, get caught up, or provide updates. One more benefit to an effective communication plan is that it allows for continuity of the project's operations. If a new project manager comes onto the project and sees the plan, they should be able to quickly access past meeting notes and documentation, as well as current and upcoming communications. The communication plan also helps with effective change management, the process of delivering your final project and getting it successfully implemented. When others have access to the communication plan after you leave the project, they'll be able to fix any problems that might come up, make decisions, or apply similar processes to a new project. Hopefully by now, you're feeling more familiar with the ways a communication plan can lead your project to success. Keep in mind, this is just a basic plan, and there are lots of other ways to structure one. It all depends on what kind of project you're working on. Up next, I'll take you through the details of a communication plan and show you how to use it to manage project communications effectively and efficiently. Now that you know what a communication plan is and the basic categories that go in it, the next step is filling in your plan. In this video, you'll learn how to set up a communication plan that works best for all the different people involved with your project, and what kind of information to include in your plan. Things like who needs to be involved in the project communication, what's the best way to communicate, why are you communicating, and how often should you communicate. There are a few key benefits to planning your communications upfront. Creating a communication plan helps improve the overall effectiveness of communication, keeps people engaged and motivated throughout the project, and gets stakeholders involved in effective conversations. Let's try building a sample communication plan so you can see how it helps with managing the different aspects of project communication. We'll continue with the Office Green Plant Pals project. Here's an example of a basic communication plan using a spreadsheet. Before anything else, think about what types of communication you'll be using throughout your project. Feel free to refer back to your RACI chart and stakeholder map, which are tools that will help you figure out what type of communication might work best for each person, group, or role. In this example, let's say the stakeholders are busy senior executives who may not need day-to-day details. So instead of daily meetings, it's better to send a newsletter that summarizes key milestones and project progress to date. Let's type that in. The core team, on the other hand, may benefit from a daily stand-up, which is a daily meeting designed to bring everyone up to date on key information. Here, each team member briefly describes any completed work and any barriers that stand in their way. This is common in agile project management, as it helps the team stay coordinated and move quickly throughout the project. So, we will go ahead and enter daily stand-ups in this row. But sometimes, daily meetings aren't possible for given time zone restrictions or other obligations. Don't worry, there are other ways to keep communication flowing. For example, the project team that created this program had daily email status updates for the whole team to report which action items were being worked on for the day. They also used a project tracker for tasks and milestones to make sure everyone's on the same page. Next up, think about who needs to receive information about your project. These are the communication recipients. It helps to look back to the stakeholder map and RACI chart again. Ask yourself, who needs to be heavily involved in the details? Who has high interest in the project? Who needs only to be informed of major milestones? I already mentioned that key stakeholders would be receiving a monthly newsletter, so I'll type that in now. Also, we know that the core team will be participating in daily stand-ups, so I'll add that in as well. Excellent. We're moving right along. Next up in recipients are the project subgroups for marketing, procurement, and product development. Let's add separate meetings in for each of those groups in addition to the core team meetings. Since those subgroups are not part of the core team, you might only want to meet with them weekly instead of every day. Let's add weekly check-in to each of these. Great. Another best practice is to list contact information and time zones in your communication plan. That way, you know when people are available for communicating. Let's add that in. Feel free to hide this column, since it contains sensitive information about people involved in your project. There are other ways to list contact information privately and link it for easy reference. I'll teach you how to do that in another video. If you're having trouble deciding which type of communication to use, One way to help you choose is by thinking about the frequency. As I mentioned earlier, a senior stakeholder probably won't be able to attend daily meetings, and they don't need every piece of information. Instead, you can communicate with a senior stakeholder on a weekly or monthly basis, and you can focus on high-level status updates like overall progress, recent wins, or milestones reached, and current metrics. In this case, let's send out the project newsletter once a month. If you're unsure, it's always great to ask senior stakeholders which method of communication works best for them. When you work with your core team on a project, you need to get into more of the day-to-day details. Check in regularly and ask how everything is going, how they're doing on tasks, and do they need your help with anything. Adding a daily meeting for your core team and a weekly meeting for the subgroups. Let's make that happen. Great. Meeting more frequently can help unblock issues and keep the project on the right track. This leads us to key dates. Listing key dates and times are important for coordination. For example, if you're launching a product or new process or giving a presentation, you should list the key dates. Keep in mind, not every type of communication needs a specific key date listed. For example, with daily or weekly communications, you might not need to specify the actual date every week. You could just list every Monday or something like that. Let's add in key dates to our plan. For the monthly newsletter, let's send that on the first Monday of every month. Let's schedule the daily stand-ups at noon. And the weekly check-ins are on Wednesdays at 2, 3, and 4 o'clock. Wonderful. Now let's talk about delivery methods, like email, in-person, and virtual meetings. A shared document that gets updated regularly, or a progress report that gets presented. Deciding the best way to communicate is a skill. One thing I continuously need to adapt and work to improve in my role as project manager is communicating among different teams and levels of authority. A director or executive may only have 5 minutes, so I need to be concise and know exactly what I need from them. Likewise, I might be used to communicating via instant message and video chat with my core team. However, one of the subgroups on the project might respond better to emails and in-document comments. Let me add in these methods for our communication plan, starting with email. Emails are a very common way to get people in sync, but write too much and you may lose your audience. After all, no one really wants to read a 2-page email. One way to get around this is by adding a note at the top of your email. This will alert readers that some details of a long email may not be relevant to them. With this kind of email, lead with key points and action items, limited to 2 to 3 sentences. Then include a longer section at the bottom for those who want or need additional details. The goal of communicating is getting your point across effectively. So think carefully about what you need to accomplish with each type of communication. For high-level stakeholders in particular, I'm constantly trying to answer, so what? Why should they care about my project? The same goes for my core team. What information is going to help make sure they complete tasks on time and stay motivated? Thinking about these questions helps me focus on the most important bits of information to share. So let's fill this in the communication plan. The goal of the monthly newsletter for stakeholders is to give a status update overview. Great. And goals for the daily stand-ups with the core team would be to report progress updates, blockers, and determining next steps. So let's add those in as well. All set. Next, you need to make sure you're able to reach everyone you need to communicate with. So it helps if communication is a team effort. Especially on more complex projects, you shouldn't be the only one communicating. you want to enable other team members to be involved in communications based on their expertise in the project. I'll add a column for sender and owner to indicate who is responsible for each communication. Then I'll add the sender or owner for each of these communication types, starting with the project manager as the sender for the newsletter. Great, and we are all done. Keep in mind, it's always a good idea to check in with everyone to make sure communications meet their needs. Everyone absorbs information differently. What works best for you doesn't always work best for others. Some people are more visual and want to see charts and graphs. Some people might prefer to listen to information through a presentation or a meeting. Some people may want to review and analyze information on their own first and then speak with someone about what they've read. So, if you're only presenting information in just one or two ways, you risk engaging some people but not others. Your goal as project manager is to optimize and streamline communications. A great way to optimize your communications for everyone on the team is by sending a brief email or survey that asks 3 questions. What is working in how we communicate with you about the project? What is not working or is not effective in our communications? Where can we improve our communications with you? This will give you plenty of useful information on how you can adapt the communication style to cater to each team member. Communication plans contain a lot of important information, and there are so many different ways to set one up, depending on the size of your team and the needs of your project. Whichever system you choose to use, the most important thing is to make sure your communication plan clearly identifies who needs to be involved in project communication, what methods are being used to communicate, why are you communicating, and how often you are communicating. So that wraps up our discussion on how to effectively fill in a communication plan. In the next video, I'll share with you some best practices for documenting all the information you and your team will be communicating throughout the project. See you in a bit. Great to see you again. Now that you're here, let's talk about the importance of documentation and how it serves as a form of communication for others to reference and contribute to. I'll share an example with you. Once I worked on a project that involved several teams, from quality assurance, testing, design, partner engineering, and program managers. Each team was responsible for their own set of deliverables. To keep all teams on the same page, it was important for everyone to store their plans and reports in one centralized place. This allowed any team member to quickly find the documents they needed. Documentation storage and sharing is very important. Having plans in one place makes communication quicker, easier, and more streamlined, because everyone knows where to find any information they need. And just as important is making sure your files are stored with clear labels or organized into folders. For example, on my team, we have certain reports stored in one central place. This makes it easier for teams in different countries to find and share their research with each other, which optimizes workflow and reduces duplicate work. Documenting and organizing plans also provides visibility and accountability. Your project plan is a great example of this. Each task has an owner and a due date. This creates visibility for the members of the project team and accountability for the task owner. It's common for members of the team and senior stakeholders to reference your project plan and associated documents when they need a refresher on timelines or milestones. So having up-to-date plans will help ensure there's no room for misinterpretation or miscommunication. Once you've created a centralized location for your documents, it's time to think about managing permissions of your files and folders. If someone isn't a core part of the project team, you might not want them to have full access to all of the meeting notes. Instead, summarize the relevant information into a status report for those who need to stay informed of final outcomes, but don't need all background information. There's another big benefit to setting up your project plans and centralizing them in one place: continuity. As the project manager, there could be times when you need to suddenly leave the project. Say you got sick, transferred to another project, or needed to take a leave of absence. Another project manager may need to step in, and if all the project information is scattered across unorganized personal notes, it's not very helpful. But if you documented all the plans in one place, the new project manager can find everything they need and pick up right where you left off. So, it's always useful to store guides, manuals, meeting notes, plans, and processes all in a centralized place and clearly labeled. You'll also want to make sure the people in relevant roles are granted access to those documents. So even if you're not present, the project can carry on. As project manager, it's your job to ensure that project data can be accessed in the future by others. Documenting your plans and making them available is part of a project management best practice called knowledge management. If someone needs to review this project for making decisions or planning similar projects, they should be able to easily access the information they need. It also helps set the tone for future projects and future project managers, which can be incredibly helpful if you happen to be the one jumping onto a new project. For example, if an architect is working on a kitchen remodel and they want to make a decision about the design, they can look at the old project plans to understand why the decision was made to put the sink in a certain location. Or if a new architect comes in halfway through the remodel, they might want to know why the other architect designed the plumbing a certain way. By looking at the old plans, they can go back and get the information and context they need to move forward with more informed decisions. It's also important to determine what kind of information to share with whom and when. Focus on the key information related to what specific individuals need to know. Think about this scenario. A project manager who's working with all the VPs at their company decides to send out daily updates. From a communication standpoint, what could be the potential impact of the project manager's decision? Well, since VPs get lots of emails, they're not likely to read the updates. That ends up being a waste of time for you. Also, when you send a lot of unnecessary information, then it's hard to tell what's really important. Figuring out the right information to share is even more important when you're working on projects that have sensitive data. In those cases, you need to be very careful of how you share information about your project with stakeholders who do not have permissions to view sensitive data. For example, financial data or user survey results are often highly sensitive and should never be made available to unauthorized viewers. Here's another scenario. Let's say your team is working on a high-profile launch of a brand new product, say an electric car. Most people don't need to know all of the thinking behind the project or see all the draft versions, but they do need to know what the final design will look like. The project is legally sensitive, and you want to avoid leaks and oversharing classified data. If you share the entire project folder with everyone who needs to know only the end result, you risk doing just that, revealing highly sensitive and classified data. If this information gets leaked to the wrong people, project plans and company data could be made public, ruining the big launch of the electric car. You also risk violating company policy and damaging your reputation as a trustworthy and responsible project manager. Only share information on a need-to-know basis. It's your job to present the right information at the right time to the right people. Now let me show you an example. In this sample communication plan, one of the resources is user feedback surveys. This resource contains raw data collected from surveys submitted by PlantPow's test users, which means it has personally identifiable information, or PII. PII is anything that possibly reveals someone's identity, like a screen name, password, phone number, email address, first or last name, anything like that. For that reason, Only share that resource with the members of the project team who are approved to access this level of information. Then, if anyone else tries to open the document, they will be alerted that they need to request permission to access it. If you need to share results of these surveys, those can be presented in a graph, chart, or summarized in a report without any PII included. Then you can share that information with the broader team. Now you have a better understanding of how important documentation is to project management. Coming up next, we'll learn the best way to put your plan together and stay organized. See you later. Hi again. So far in this course, you've filled in or created some different project planning resources, like the project plan, budget, RACI chart, risk management plan, and now a communications plan. We also discussed the importance of organizing your communications and having easy and appropriate access to project plans. Now, I'll show you one way you can organize all your project information in one centralized place. You'll be able to apply these same general techniques to almost any type of project management style or system. Organizing your project plans makes everyone's job easier and eliminates opportunity for confusion. As a project manager, your goal is to have all of your project resources documented and linked in a way to where you or anyone on the project can access what they need quickly. A couple of handy ways to get organized are using a shared file drive like Google Drive and creating one resource like a document or spreadsheet that links all of the files and resources that your project uses. Here's an example of how to organize your files in Google Drive. But it doesn't matter which shared system your project team uses. You can use the same process for pretty much all of them. First, create a new folder and label it with the name of your project. Use this folder to store all your project files. You can even create subfolders and store them in the main project folder. You can also stay organized by creating a centralized planning document that links everything together. This can serve as a quick reference guide that you can use to find all your frequently accessed files in one place. Here's an office screen example that's already been started. One at a time, select a resource name, then link it. Now you can access the file directly from the centralized document. If your project uses multiple spreadsheets and you want to avoid having to open lots of separate files, you can group them within one sheet, like this. This sheet has tabs for all the other sheets that contain project information. You can add a new sheet at any time. It's helpful to include an overview sheet and link any non-spreadsheet files. This is also a good place to provide a brief description of the project, instructions for how to use the sheet, or communication expectations. In this example, the overview sheet is called the dashboard, which is the same thing. You can decide how to label yours. There you have it. Now you're organized and ready to show everyone what an awesome project manager you are.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a diversity program manager here at Google. So I lead diversity programming and strategy for one of our business units here at Google. I focus in on diversity programming for our most underrepresented Googlers, like our Black plus, our Latinx, and our Native populations here at Google. Program manager world, where every single day I'm thinking about who needs to be involved in the projects that I work on, who will care to invest in the programs that I want to roll out, right? Because I need to get buy-in for certain programs to get greenlit, right? So I'm always thinking about how I'm organizing my materials. I'm always thinking about packaging and telling a story behind all of it so I can continue to do the great work that I do. An artifact is anything that you physically put together that describes or showcases the work that you're doing. So that could be a document that is, say, an executive brief or just an overview of the work that you're doing, or it could be something as tactical as a roles and responsibility sheet, right? So breaking down who on your team is handling what and to whom you need to present. It's really important to keep that organized because it's not just for my own use, but it's also for anyone who I engage, right? So a stakeholder or someone who needs to sign off on a project, or it might be my teammates on something. I often bring in either volunteers or full-time help to help build the programs that I run. Lastly, say we have an outside vendor. They need to understand where they fit into the larger picture, but also what they tactically need to do to make the program successful. So keeping artifacts allows you to have the best possible outcome in all program management elements. And regardless of that piece, you also want to be able to showcase your work at the end so that when it comes time to possibly get more budget for a program or to take the program to the next level, you have a good baseline to really understand from where you started and how far you've come. When you have all those artifacts, it's really important to be able to speak to how those artifacts allowed you to be successful. The artifacts are really what tangibly show someone during a job interview that you were the one that did the work to make the program or the project successful, right? So if you just talk about a project or a program at a high level in a job interview, the interviewer might want to know more detail. And the artifacts allow you to show that detail, allow you to show not only what happened with the project and how far it came, but also your contributions to it. And it physically shows your ability to conduct the entire process from start to finish. You're the quarterback, right? And the quarterback also holds the playbook. And if you don't have the playbook, who on the team is going to know what to do other than you? You run the show. And so effectively, you want to make sure that you're able to showcase in any setting, whether it be while you're currently working on the project or later and during an interview, all that you did to make the program or project successful.
Job searching, whether it's your first time or your 10th, is a common but unique experience. And whether you're looking for an entry-level position, considering a career switch, or re-entering the workforce after a hiatus, you need a resume. Your resume will be a key document throughout your job search. It's how recruiters can get an initial sense of who you are as a potential employee, and so it's really important to pay attention to the information on it. Most resumes share many of the same core elements. These are your contact information, previous work and educational experience, and skills. Documenting your experience in a resume gives you the opportunity to stand out to a potential employer. Not only do you get to list your past and current experiences, but you get to highlight your accomplishments as well. Let's break down the elements of a strong resume. Most resumes start with contact information. At the top of your document, you'll include your name, email address, and other relevant contact information you wish to include, like a phone number or address. Many resumes also include a brief 1 to 3 sentence summary of your experience. This summary is referred to as an objective or sometimes as a profile summary. For example, an objective might sound something like a passionate and customer-centered focused individual with 3 years of experience launching new products and managing processes. It's generally considered optional to add an objective or profile summary to your resume. Some recruiters like them, while others don't think they're necessary. An objective or profile summary can be helpful, however, if you're looking to change careers and want to highlight transferable experience to a recruiter. Next up is the central element of most resumes, your current and previous experience, whether work or education related. When listing your work experience, you'll include your current or previous employers and job titles. And for each job, you'll also include start and end dates, and 2 to 3 bullet points explaining your job responsibilities and accomplishments. Your educational experience isn't just high school or college, but can include online degrees, certificates, and other professional development you've completed. And finally, you may choose to include skills, especially those that are relevant to the project management roles you're applying to. As we've discussed earlier, some core skills that project managers possess include enabling decision-making, communicating, flexibility, and strong organizational skills. I'd add that it also includes skills like ability to manage tasks effectively, work well with others, follow through on tasks, and hold teammates accountable. It could also include industry knowledge, like experience with digital tools or work management software. You can highlight these skills and more on your resume, either listed out in a dedicated skills section or incorporated into your section on current and previous experience. Another great skill that some people forget to add are additional languages spoken. If you have a high level of fluency in another language, it's definitely worth mentioning. Another way to show off skills is to mention hobbies on your resume, like volunteer work or experience working in your community. Sometimes, listing hobbies that speak to your interests and background can say a lot about you, and that can be helpful to a hiring manager. In addition to highlighting what you're passionate about, many hobbies also require skills that a project manager can use on the job. For instance, some hobbies I see on a resume, coaching a youth sports team or teaching an art class, may tell me you're able to solve problems and connect with people. Things like that really stand out to me because they show that you're someone who has interests beyond their career. Including a broad variety of items on your resume can help show that you're excited about learning new things outside of work. Personally, I think this makes for incredibly interesting candidates. And these are the kinds of qualities we look for when hiring program managers at Google. We are always looking for people who can bring new perspectives and life experiences to our teams. Google's culture is diverse and inclusive, and we look for people who are open to learn new things and are great collaborators. This is especially true in project and program management. We look for candidates who are open to trying new things, because sometimes your first attempt at something may not go as planned and you'll need to try a different tactic. And we look for people who can effectively collaborate with other teams outside their own project teams to help everyone reach their goals. As you can see, a strong resume can really help you tell a powerful story about yourself, providing a full picture of who you are, what your strengths are, and what you're passionate about. Before I wrap up, it's important to note that a resume isn't the only way to document your abilities. You can also use online communities like LinkedIn as an additional tool to increase your opportunities. The same details on your resume should be stressed in your LinkedIn profile. Additionally, recruiters and hiring managers use LinkedIn to scout for talent, view a candidate's professional journey, and gain insights to skills, networks, professional associates, things that may not have been included in the typical resume. A recent survey showed that 90% of recruiters use LinkedIn to search for qualified job applicants. Once you document your experience, you can begin to search for and apply to jobs at companies. You want to get it right on paper before you have the next conversation. You'll have the opportunity to continue building this skill in the associated readings and activities. So take advantage of these resources and polish or create that new resume. I'll see you soon.
I'm Dan, and I'm a program manager at Google Research. As a program manager in research, I work to make sure that all of the teams I work with are on the same page, whether that's product teams who are implementing the research or research teams who need to understand kind of how to define their research agenda for future projects. So a lot of what I do is effective communication and trying to create kind of detailed documentation so that everyone can kind of connect the dots. One thing that I've observed as a program manager is a kind of a proliferation of documents, or what I like to call death by 1,000 documents. So it becomes really important to have one kind of master document where you centralize all the kind of sub-documents or smaller docs that you might need to execute a project. And then you can just go to the master document and find what you need, even if that lives somewhere else. So I can go into my like kind of master tracker and I can find the program charter. I can find the budget. I can find the agreed upon scope, any document that has like approval matrices, which is like a list of all the approvals I need, things like that. If I can link out to everything from just one place, I know that I'll always be able to start there and find what I need. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach to project or program management. So you might need a risk management plan for one project, but not another, and there might be some other type of documentation you need. So really keeping everything organized and starting from one place is the most helpful tip I can give. A broader trend in program management or project management documentation is that you don't just take one pass at a document. You don't finish your project plan or your project charter in one go. You have to constantly return to it, revise it, and continue to, it's a living and breathing document. And the more detailed you can be in your documentation, the fewer iterations you're going to need to go through later on, because they're more likely to get things right the first time.
You've done a lot of work so far. Let's take a moment to review all you learned in this course. First, you learned the key components of the planning phase and explored how proper planning ensures that milestones and tasks are completed. Next, you learned why it is necessary to create and manage a project plan, how to utilize time estimation methods to prevent project failure, how to get viable estimates using soft skills, and which tools you can use to build a project plan. Then, you learned what the components of a project budget are, how the budget process works, and the concepts behind estimating and tracking a project budget. And we discussed how the procurement process flows to manage paperwork, bids, proposals, and performance. You also learned about risk management and how it helps prevent project failure. You learned how to identify risks and measure their impact on a project, and how to communicate and monitor potential risks once they're identified. Finally, you learned how important it is to document plans. You learned how to organize plans to provide visibility and accountability, and what elements of a simple communication plan are vital to project success. In the next course, you'll continue on to executing and closing a project, where my colleague Alita will be your guide. She's going to teach you all about tracking and measuring project progress, risk management, using data to make decisions, and effective project communication. I had a wonderful time sharing my project management experience with you. Best of luck.